The main character shares how his friend invited him to the boxing ring and how hard it was for him. But he told this to a robot, who found it difficult to understand his train of thought. Instead of listening to the guy, he continued doing his job. The guy realized that there was no point in explaining anything to him. At this moment, another robot appeared, which needed to make room to move on. Michael graciously stepped aside. However, he was annoyed that there was no one here to listen to him. He couldn't understand why almost all the employees in this center were robots, and there were very few people. Perhaps this job was not suitable for him. It happened not long ago, when he returned after serving his time. But his joy did not last long. Michael's mother called to tell him that she and his father were moving, and had paid in advance for rent for her son's apartment. He had money set aside in a savings account, which helped him take his time while looking for a job. At first he was full of enthusiasm, but everywhere people with work experience were needed. So very soon his spirits began to fade. And then one of the sisters gave him an idea, and so he found himself in the logistics center. Then the manager called him, and he asked Michael to check if there were a few more cans of tuna lying around in the warehouse. He agreed, despite the fact that the manager had already gotten on his nerves. Michael went into the warehouse in search of the necessary cans. I didn't search for long and found the right box, although I was surprised by its incorrect location. Suddenly the warehouse door slammed shut, and no matter how much he tried to turn the handle, it wouldn't budge. The guy was confused and didn't understand what had suddenly happened. The manager's phone was also unavailable. He even thought about calling emergency services, but he had no serious reason to do it. Besides, he could have set up the manager that way. In the end, Michael decided to wait and fool around in the chat with his sisters. The second sister's message discouraged him. When he received his sister's call, he wanted to find out why she was joking like that. But a minute later, the alarm went off in the room. Michael tried to understand what was happening, although it was difficult. The voice that accompanied the alarm announced that all employees must leave the premises. The guy started to desperately pound on the door, trying to shout and ask for help. But in vain. It was also impossible to call the rescuers because the connection was lost. He was overcome with panic due to the unknown. The door was hit with blows that left huge dents. Michael, despite his body being paralyzed with fear, realized that he couldn't make a sound. It was not difficult to guess that this was clearly not human strength. Out of desperation and ignorance, all that was left was to wait. 3 days have passed since everything happened. Even though they never came back for him, he at least knew that because he was here, he was still alive. All this time he was making notes on his phone, but the battery doesn't last forever. He just wanted his family not to get hurt. Suddenly, a system appeared in front of him, informing him about the possibility of saving the object. Michael took this as a sign that he was going crazy. Since his mind was failing him, he was not averse to playing along and named the Order Assembly Center as the object of preservation. After that, the space around him seemed to distort, and he began to fall rapidly, and landed in an unknown place in the middle of ruins. Michael looked around, taking in the surroundings that looked like the apocalypse. The boy felt unwell due to the rapid fall and vomited. Suddenly he noticed a shadow behind him that was too large for a human. He froze when a roar came from behind him. Michael recognized the sound from the warehouse. He tried to convince himself that it was just a big animal, even though he knew it was something much worse. But, seeing the blood on the stone, he could not resist, and rushed forward as fast as he could, calling for help. While he was running, he managed to turn around for a second and immediately regretted it when he realized that an orc was chasing him. Michael couldn't understand why the orc was so fast and why he was even here, and he didn't have time to assess the situation. At the last moment, the system announced the completion of synchronization and made it possible to penetrate into subspace. Michael, who was being caught up by the orc, was absolutely not against getting out of here as quickly as possible. And, gathering his last strength, he made a dash into the portal. The orc remained sealed on the other side of the portal. The guy wasn't sure about the reliability of the portal. However, the drone above dispelled his fears, telling him that no one and nothing would get in here without Michael's permission. Looking around, he couldn't believe where he was. This was that very logistics center. The system gave him a magic stone as a reward for successfully entering the subspace, and provided information about the center. Michael found it strange that there were only 2 minutes left before the shutdown. The drone suggested that the center had been modified to suit subspace and would run on magical stones. One stone maintains energy supply for 24 hours. Michael, although he listened, could not shake the thought that this was all his imagination. PAX announced that the power supply had been cut off, and if it is turned off, PAX Fresh will suffer. This is a system that allows you to store various foods and deliver them frozen. Since the situation outside subspace was critical, food was essential for Michael. The power outage was a big problem, and a solution had to be found. PAX said that stones can be obtained from other creatures, and so far he has only met one such person. He gave the stone to PAX to renew his energy, and he went away to look for something that would help in the fight against the orc. It was impossible to hit an orc up close, but it was possible to use knives, of which there weren't that many. Michael wanted to try to at least injure him. He swung and hit the orc in the shoulder. He only became more angry. Michael was running out of ideas on how to hurt him. The only option left is with an axe. He asked the robot to find out how many axes were left. In total, they had 15 pieces in their arsenal. When he found them, he was surprised that they were somehow duplicated. He was told that these items were transformed from objects into information, and accordingly could be duplicated. This way they won't run out, and this center became an endless supply of all kinds of things. It dawned on Michael that he no longer had to worry about resources, and he also won't have to fight the orc on his own. PAX explained that the delivery could only take place after a certain amount of time, but that it could be shortened by upgrading Michael's ability. All you had to do was say the word delivery, and the item would be sent. After Michael said this word, an axe flew into the orc at high speed, knocking him back. Seeing Pax's state after being sent, Michael asked what her speed was, and I was shocked to learn that the delivery speed was 60 kilometers per hour. The drone explained that the speed could be increased by upgrading the ability, which in turn could be increased by using stones. From that moment on, Michael was determined, changed into suitable clothes. I took a map of Seoul, and he circled the required route with markers. It would have been impossible to walk such a route, and fortunately, he had a bicycle. So, having gathered himself, he set out to look for his relatives. It had been about half an hour since he had left subspace, and he had managed to kill a fair number of orcs. During this time, he managed to master his ability. At the moment of the orcs' attack, he deftly dodged and opened a portal, where no one could get to him. And then he could strike the monster, although not always successfully. He also learned about the return item feature, which could return a discarded item back. He saw no need to return the axes, but this function was very helpful in attracting magic stones. Now he had 13 stones at his disposal. Although he didn't fully understand why the stones were drawn to him if the return of goods was supposed to work on shipped items. In any case, he didn't want to delve too deeply into it. The most important thing for him now was to find a family. Another thing Michael learned was that there were other monsters besides orcs. It was not really clear what kind of monster it was and how to deal with it. Suddenly, Michael heard a scream. The man desperately tried to escape, but the monster was too close. He swung his tail and hit the man in the back, which caused him to fly off a short distance. His comrade ran to his aid, but the monster was not going to fly away so easily. A man named Choi was ready to say goodbye to life, but the monster did not attack, and the man behind was afraid that the monster was aiming for his friend. He tried to think of what could be done, but he turned around when he heard a sound and a light in the distance. Something flew into the monster. It was an axe. The man stared at the wyvern, shocked that the monster had been killed with an axe. Mike politely asked if the boys were okay and turned off the bike light. The men looked at him in amazement, assessing and wondering who he could be. They mistook Michael for a military man, but the guy showed them a uniform with the PAX logo. They were surprised by this, but still admired his skills. One of the men said that he received the ability of a driver here, but Choi didn't get his ability. Michael asked why there were no people there. Choi explained that they were in Block C, where there were many logistics centers and there were many people. But because of the monsters that appeared, most were killed, and there were only a few survivors. They went out to get some food, but the building was gone. Michael was asked to go with them to the fourth underground floor. He had no desire to go with them, but he needed any information about transportation. As they moved further, a stone appeared from the wyvern, and Michael had no plans to tell others about his ability just yet. When they reached the fourth underground floor, Michael watched a strong man finish off an orc. He looked at the newcomer with a heavy gaze, and his gaze sent shivers down Michael's spine. Choi ran to the man to find out what happened. According to him, the orc came to them by chance, so they got off easy. But now this place was no longer a refuge for them. Michael looked at the orc with bewilderment, and perhaps already regretted a little that he had come here. The voice of a man who wanted to know who they had brought Michael out of his thoughts. Choi explained that Michael was the one who saved him and his comrade from the wyvern. He told about how skillfully Michael dealt with the monster. This was followed by an admiring reaction from those around. One woman came up to thank him for saving her friends, but the guy didn't consider himself worthy of such praise. A woman named Agu even tried to casually find out if he had someone. The man next to them decided to ease the awkward atmosphere and said that they had all been working together for a long time and called themselves a family. He introduced himself as David, the general manager of the express terminal, and in turn, he thanked them for saving people. He allowed Michael to stay and, if he needed, eat and drink or rest. There were enough supplies for everyone, so he could eat as much as he wanted. Ethan had something he wanted to tell the boss, and he shocked everyone with the news that the logistics center had disappeared. David couldn't believe it, but Choi assured him it was true. Others began to talk among themselves, trying to understand what had happened. David could only accept the news. However, others were interested in what to do next. The man gave the command to first clear the tunnel, while at the same time not allowing the team to lose heart. It helped lift the spirits. Michael didn't quite understand what they wanted to do. From David, he learned that they had working transport, but all the roads were destroyed. Now the tunnel was the last chance, but there were wyverns in it. He didn't have to go with them, though, since there were other options to leave this place with a bicycle. However, Michael needed proper transportation, so he wanted to help. David approved of the boy's enthusiasm, but it was dangerous to demonstrate his ability now. After all, it was unclear how others would react. Moreover, the people around him still treated him with caution. He offered to be the first to go and inspect the tunnel. He had a total of 5 stones that could reduce the delivery time. The system offered him new functions: precise delivery, simultaneous delivery of 2 items at once, and setting the delivery time. They could greatly help Michael and cost 10 stones for each ability. All he had to do was kill a few wyverns, and he would have enough stones. But Ethan tagged along with him. He didn't want to leave Michael alone, but the boy just wanted to be left. Ethan truly believed that Michael could save everyone, so he helped. Michael tried to figure out how Ethan's ability worked, but Ethan himself didn't really know. And he hadn't seen the system for a long time. This made Michael feel uneasy. He didn't have high hopes, but unexpectedly for him, the bike jerked forward at high speed, and Ethan looked too confident. Michael asked why he was standing in such a strange position. This was all because the wyverns were difficult to spot among the large number of vehicles. One of them stuck its head out. Ethan didn't know what to do next, but Michael shouted at him to look ahead at the road. At that very moment, something struck the monster. While the stone he received for killing the wyvern was returning to Michael, he specifically told Ethan not to turn around, so that he wouldn't see something he shouldn't. Further on, they noticed a tunnel, but Ethan slammed on the brakes. The guy was confused by the sudden stop until he looked back. They were surrounded by monsters on all sides. One of the wyverns targeted Michael. Ethan understood that the bike wouldn't help them here, and he was ready to say goodbye to life. They wouldn't have enough time to escape, and all they could do was hope that Michael would come up with something. Otherwise, they will have only their last minutes to live. The guy realized that the situation was critical, and he had no other choice but to reveal the truth. He gave up the last 5 stones to speed up the recharge while Ethan was confused. Then the wyverns rushed at them, and Michael called for delivery, thereby killing the monster. He tried to calm Ethan, who didn't understand what had happened. And looking back, I saw a portal to the logistics center behind Michael. Thanks to the magic stones, the reload time was reduced from 30 seconds to 5. Now Michael could protect Ethan and asked him to stay close. Ethan agreed, although he still didn't fully understand what he saw. Hearing Michael's scream, he turned back. At that moment, a wyvern was flying towards Ethan and was already very close. But she was killed thanks to Michael's ability. The next one was already rushing towards them, but she couldn't harm them because of the portal, which made them fly off in different directions. The next one attacked from the sky. Michael threw an axe at her, but he missed, only making her even more angry. And when she almost caught him, Michael jumped into the portal, who didn't let the monster inside and pushed him away. Ethan watched Michael's actions in amazement the entire time, trying to logically connect what was happening. And what he was now sure of was that the monsters posed no threat to Michael. After all, he managed to clear the tunnel as easily as possible. He understood perfectly well that even despite the presence of transport, it would be difficult for them outside the tunnel, since the monsters were still here. But Michael had a different situation. His abilities were enviable. Only now did he notice how one of the wyverns disappeared from sight. Most likely they realized that Michael was a danger to them. Seeing the magic stone, Ethan asked what it was. Michael explained that they can be used to improve the ability. Ethan expressed his admiration for Michael's unexpected ability, thinking that with such power, he could kill all the monsters. But his reaction was mixed. Michael admitted that he only wanted to inspect the tunnel and, if possible, deal with the monsters quietly. And he wasn't eager to show his abilities yet. Ethan apologized for ruining their plans, but Michael wasn't angry with him. He suggested that they go back while they still had the chance. Ethan was curious about how far Michael was planning to go, so he needed a car. Michael said that he wanted to find his family and named the planned route. It was right on the way to where Ethan needed to go, so he invited Michael to go with him. After all, he wasn't sure if he could get home safely, since his ability was driving and he wasn't a good fighter. But Michael's ability could be useful to him, and they could join forces, and he promised that he wouldn't become an extra burden. Michael liked the idea. However, he was afraid that he would not be able to hide his powers from others. And I wasn't sure how they would behave if they found out. But he decided that at least he could trust Ethan. Michael agreed. But he set the condition that he himself had to clear the tunnel. So he asked Ethan to make sure he wasn't disturbed. Ethan was confident that he could do it. When he got back, he told those present that Michael would clear the tunnel for them himself, using an ability he kept secret. Michael was shocked that Ethan had essentially spilled the beans on things he shouldn't have. It was clear that others would have questions. Michael knew that Ethan's chatter had gotten him into deep trouble. There was no point in hiding it any longer, so he assured that he could clear the tunnel alone. They have little supply left, so they have no choice but to believe. David decided not to ask Michael about his powers, but as a thank you, they collected some supplies for him while he was in the tunnel, and they apologized for not being able to help anymore. Michael wanted to object, but Ethan asked him to accept the offered supplies so as not to offend others. After all, they understood the risk he was taking, and that, most likely, his family was waiting for him somewhere. And that made him think. And the rest decided to drink to the fact that tomorrow they would be able to leave this place. The next morning, he set out for the tunnel. Everyone who was there came out to see him off. At the entrance to the tunnel, monsters were already waiting for him. He remembered how, long ago as a child, he had quarreled with his sister, and the father tried to reconcile them. After all, they were close anyway. Their father told them that he always dreamed of having a brother or sister, and I was sure that the time would come when they would understand how important family is. At that time, their mother began to grumble at their father for forgetting to help her in the kitchen. But these were still funny moments. He thought about this as he watched the others. They looked like a big family. As the night approached, most of them fell asleep after getting drunk. But Ethan suddenly woke up, and I discovered that Michael was not there. He decided to ask the others who were awake. According to them, Michael had gone out to get some air. Ethan went out to see where he might be, found him near one of the vans. Ethan was concerned that perhaps Michael was uncomfortable sleeping there, but he just couldn't sleep, and he showed that he had been loading trucks all this time. A total of 15 trucks were filled. Ethan was surprised, but Michael asked him not to tell anyone about it. Now he was on the other side of the portal, while the wyverns continued to attack. He thought that it would be nice if it were possible to move people into subspace. However, to do this, it was necessary to raise its level. Then it would be possible to accommodate about 20 people. Michael looked at the system thoughtfully, realizing that he needed many more stones to reach the next level. He wondered about the number of wyverns left in the tunnel, estimating that there were about 40 of them left. But he admitted that if it weren't for the precision delivery feature, he probably wouldn't have been able to kill so many monsters. Michael thought about his family and the need to level up in order for them to move into subspace. At this time, one of the wyverns came a little closer to him. Other people were waiting for Michael to return all this time. They decided that it was better to wait where they were and not go into the tunnel. The old man was the first to notice his approach. Michael was riding his bike along a destroyed street. Everyone breathed a sigh of relief. After all, Michael returned unharmed. People were very happy to see him alive. David hoped that everyone would now be able to get home safely. They wished the same for him. Michael warned that if something happened on the way, they could look in the cargo compartment of the trucks, where he left something. After that, everyone got into their cars and started driving out. On the way, they waved goodbye to each other. Michael couldn't stop thinking about the last wyvern he saw. He was different from others. Perhaps it was their leader. The path they traveled was difficult. Corpses of soldiers were often found on the road. The picture was not a pleasant one. Apparently, the situation in the city was much worse than one could imagine. Nearby, one of the monsters was finishing off someone's body. Michael thought that if he had returned from the army a couple of months later, he might not be here anymore. Another problem arose on their way. The road was blocked. They assumed that the wire was installed by the military. Michael noticed something in the distance. At the end of the bridge on the road, there was a pack of monsters. Ethan was already about to turn the truck around and look for another road. But Michael noticed a small but empty sidewalk nearby. It was possible to try to get through it. He asked Ethan if they could get around on the sidewalk. Even though it was narrow, there was a chance. Michael decided that in that case they would drive along it. But Ethan didn't like the idea. Michael gave the example of an old game in which you had to fight with opponents, and the situation around them reminded him very much of one of the cards in this game. He asked Ethan to turn the cargo bay toward the sidewalk, and then I unblocked automatic delivery. The remaining stones were used to improve the characteristics. Now he was ready to give the monsters a beating. Michael threw refrigerators at the monsters, for which he received 12 stones. Now he certainly didn't regret improving the range and accuracy of delivery. However, the precision delivery could not track the target's route, and this was a disadvantage. After all, the monsters this time were quite fast and could easily dodge the attack. They didn't even pay attention to the death of their relatives, and it would be difficult for them to dodge the refrigerator, and its weight immediately knocks them off their feet. Moreover, thanks to the improvement of automatic delivery, the whole process was much easier. There was no need to even look. Ethan was in complete shock at this time. He thought Michael's ability was limited to axes. Besides, all the items looked the same, and he didn't understand why there was a need to keep so many similar products. Michael, who looked quite relaxed, suggested something to eat. But the only thing that worried Ethan now was the question of whether Michael had an endless supply. Michael thought that Ethan had already figured it out. Ethan didn't know and thought the guy was collecting axes because he had a limited supply, but he only did it because he didn't want them lying around in the middle of the road. What was surprising to Ethan was that the supply was truly endless. He felt a little ashamed that he knew practically nothing about Michael, and Michael just shared food with him. For Michael, this was not a problem, and he was glad that the man was able to trust him. Ethan said that in the best-case scenario, he would arrive at the right place in an hour. The guy was happy to know that he would be able to meet his family. The man hoped that his relatives would be alive. Michael noticed that the sweater Ethan was wearing was quite dirty, and he suggested changing into new clothes before meeting the family. He asked what Ethan would like to wear, but Ethan was sure that Michael would have what he was wearing. However, the desired image was still found. Now almost all the problems seemed solved. Ethan was already ready to move out. He jerked the gearbox, and he pressed the gas. The car moved forward sharply. Ethan said that they would be there in 20 minutes. He drove the car quite confidently, but abruptly. Michael felt sick from the sharp turns and asked Ethan to drive more slowly. and so they reached the right place. The houses around were destroyed, but Ethan tried to convince himself that it was because they were old. He just hoped his family was okay. Michael understood his feelings. Instead of living people, there could be dead people behind the doors. He knew that Ethan wouldn't be able to open that door himself, and he offered to ring the doorbell instead of him. Ethan thought about it, but still allowed it. Michael suggested doing this because he understood how hard it was for Ethan. He told him to get ready. He was clearly very worried, but agreed. But suddenly the door opened. They immediately stared in surprise. Behind the door were his wife and daughter. The woman couldn't believe that her husband had returned home, and Ethan's eyes filled with tears, and he hugged his family tightly. Michael silently rejoiced as he watched the family reunion. A little later, the woman noticed him and asked who he was. But when Ethan introduced him to his wife, his eyes suddenly clouded over, and he fell to the floor. He was terribly sleepy and could no longer resist. He remembered his father at the moment when they were at his grandfather's funeral. He explained to Michael that parting with a loved one is not necessarily a sad moment, and that he felt rather gratitude and a feeling of love when you give and ask for nothing in return. And when he grows up, he will understand this truth. The next memory was of his fight with his sister. She hit him so hard that he accidentally fell down. He couldn't understand why she was hitting him. However, the sister even put a soft pillow under her to soften the blow. He ran off to complain to his dad, and his sister rejoiced. And then there was another moment when the father tried to reconcile them. They were just about to have dinner then. The mother suggested that her daughter might have a boyfriend because she was constantly smiling while on her phone. But she denied it in every possible way. And then they watched the fight on TV with delight. Michael didn't like the show very much. His older brother was talking to his sister about school, and he suggested that she enroll in a boxing club there. Afterwards, he recalled his transition to high school. He paid attention to how the other guys were dressed, while his uniform was old and worn, but he liked her. The next memory was of being punched in the face. A group of boys kicked him with all their might. One of them swung for another blow, but was stopped by his sister. She told him that she would now conduct training with him, and they were quite grueling, but they bore fruit, and he could walk around during school breaks without fear. At the same time, one of the sisters entered medical school, and this was a shock for everyone. After some time, his father came to tell him the news. It was a notice of enlistment in military service. His relatives came out to see him off. After all, they were worried about him too. The last thing Michael wanted was to end up in the army. After that, he woke up in a place unknown to him. The last thing he remembered was Ethan meeting his family, and just in case, he decided to arm himself. Looking back, he realized that he was in their kitchen. They watched him with bewilderment. Then an awkward atmosphere hung between them. He lowered the axe and noticed Ethan sleeping behind him. The woman explained to him that he had fainted, and they did not wake him up. Exhaling, he threw the axe back into the portal and asked how long he had been out. He slept for about 3 hours. The woman expressed her gratitude to him for helping her husband, but Michael felt awkward listening to it. Ethan woke up next. The woman realized that they were most likely hungry and offered them something to eat, since Ethan refused to eat without Michael. The guy was pleased with such care. She cooked them stewed sorry, which looked incredibly delicious. She wasn't sure if he would like the dish, but she didn't have much choice of ingredients. Michael was sure that it was very tasty, and the woman and her daughter decided to leave them alone. They wished each other bon appetit, and they started trying. Michael thought this dish was the most luxurious in the world. Michael thanked him for the food. He hadn't eaten such delicious food for a long time. Ethan remembered that Michael needed to go to Gangnam and offered to give him a ride. However, Michael had originally planned a route much further, so he needed a car. And so Ethan had a condition. They had to get to Gangnam by truck, and then Michael had to give him the electric bike. Ethan knew how absurd it sounded, but there was no other option. It was unclear to Michael why he agreed to this. After all, despite his abilities, there was still a dangerous situation around him. And since he was already back with his family, there was no point in him taking such a risk for Michael. It seemed pointless. He couldn't understand why Ethan wanted to do this. But Michael saved him and helped him get home, so he just wanted to help. And now they were in the same situation. He understood that, despite his abilities, everyone was having a hard time right now, and Michael's situation was no easier. It would be much better if they could help each other, but if it became too dangerous, he was ready to run away. Michael remembered the boys walking him into the tunnel, and he accidentally noticed the keys in one of the cars. Ethan wasn't sure that Michael would agree to his proposal. However, Michael also had a condition. He asked Ethan to stay together until he met his family. If he agrees, they will be able to strengthen the subspace and settle his wife and daughter there. Therefore, it was necessary to take his family with him. During this time, they will be able to kill enough monsters, and Michael will be able to protect his family. Ethan liked the idea and was ready to hit the road. He had 116 magic stones in his arsenal and was able to raise the level of his subspace. However, the cost of his maintenance also increased. Michael gave his permission for Ethan and his family to enter, and they were shocked by where they found themselves. He introduced them to the robot Pax, who would help them if they needed anything. Michael also told them about Pax Fresh, but the woman, whose name was Chloe, wasn't sure if they could take whatever they wanted. However, Michael reassured them and explained that all products could be duplicated. While there was time, he suggested that Ethan take a rest. Michael told them to contact him if they needed anything, and Chloe suggested making something to eat later. In the meantime, he decided to check what functions were in his arsenal. The new thing was a laboratory in subspace. He wasn't sure how it worked exactly. He wanted to explore all the new possibilities, but he didn't have enough stones. The only thing he could confirm now was that, at his command, Pax had been transported into subspace, and an idea appeared in his head. He decided to try to place the Earth inside. The system identified the target, and Michael gave the command to save. However, nothing worked. Ethan came up behind him with a map, looking at the route to Gangnam, and I decided to discuss some details of the route with him. Michael thought that Ethan would be playing with his daughter at this time, and the baby had already fallen asleep. Ethan explained that she felt calm there, so she fell asleep right after the game. He decided to thank Michael again for everything. As they prepared to leave, Michael was concerned about Ethan's seriousness. Although he seemed to be beaming, he could only help as a driver, but he could get them there very quickly. Michael wasn't thrilled with Ethan's driving techniques, as he remembered their last trip very well. After that, they moved forward. It was surprising that there were almost no monsters on the road they were traveling on. The road was a little bumpy, but generally bearable, although Michael looked exhausted. Suddenly, they noticed military barricades ahead. They wondered if there were any more soldiers there. Michael didn't think so. The equipment may have been military. However, the people did not look like military men at all. Michael suggested that they might have been watching them the whole time. He opened a portal for Ethan and told him to hide there. If these people wanted to kill them, they wouldn't have waited for time. Out of the corner of his eye, Michael noticed that there were 3 of them. The man outside didn't look friendly. Michael tried to find out what was going on. He rudely replied that it was a test, and he ordered me to get out of the car to open the trunk. They were shocked by the supplies inside the truck. The men assumed he was a courier, and Michael decided to play along. They immediately announced their intention to take all the contents and also to find out where he got it. The guy replied that he got all of this from the logistics center, but he added that they couldn't get there themselves because of the destroyed roads, and offered to bring more if they needed it. When the gang leader asked how much more supplies were left, he replied that what they saw in the truck was only a small part. One of those standing behind said that time was up. While the leader was giving commands, Michael tried to understand what they meant. The man ordered one person to take care of the truck, and decided to take charge of Michael himself, and he punched him hard in the stomach. The impact sent Michael crashing to the ground, and a bag was placed over his head. After some time, he was allowed to see where he had been taken. He knew from the corpse in the corner of the room that things were bad. The fat man, the commandant, decided to ask him about the food in the truck. Michael admitted that he collected all the products from a logistics center in a neighboring city. The commandant found the idea quite clever. The guy decided to ask where he was and why he was brought here. The man said that they were in a military unit, and instead of explaining in words what was happening, they decided to show it. Suddenly, there was a loud sound. Michael recognized him. Wyverns flew above them. There was a whole flock of them. The guy was amazed at their enormous size. The commandant had already encountered them, and explained that they were very dangerous. All his attacks had previously proven useless against them. He said that, according to the soldier whose body was lying nearby, the military had its own plan, but it failed. The soldier said that they were recruiting people to fight the monsters, but soon there were no survivors left, and now he was the boss here. He did not kill the soldier, but he went hungry for a long time. The commandant's plan was for Michael and his men to return to the logistics center and obtain supplies. If he can do it, then they will be ready to accept him. But Michael had a different plan. So he asked Pax to send communications command into subspace, and the man continued to sit on the chair, dumbfounded. Everyone around was also trying to figure out where the building had gone. At that moment, Michael felt sick. He thought it might be a side effect of sending objects into subspace. One of the team noticed that wyverns were already flying towards them. Everyone started to run away in all directions. The commandant tried to order them to shoot at the small specimens. However, there was no trace of them. He was angry at how others had betrayed him. The huge monster had already landed next to him. But he noticed how Michael was leading someone into the portal from behind. He allowed the soldier to enter. The guy realized that he had acted recklessly and decided to be more careful next time. And turning around, he realized that he was already being watched. He wondered why one of the monsters was looking at him like that. The commandant decided to try his hand and punched the wyvern. He seemed confident that it would work. In the end, he was eaten. Ethan was already running to help Michael. He was surprised that Michael brought someone with him. Michael explained that it was a military officer who had most likely been tortured. The two of them laid him down on the bed to let him rest. It's good that he didn't have any serious injuries. As soon as he wakes up, they will give him something to eat. Michael warned Ethan that there would soon be another building in subspace. However, Ethan had already noticed. The building turned out to be extremely huge. Michael told Ethan that the building was a military base. Ethan couldn't hide his shock. The boy asked Ethan to look after the soldier for a while, and he himself headed inside the military base. He was sure that he would find a lot of useful things there. However, he still didn't know how the items from there could be used. Most likely, you will have to look for the necessary things yourself. He, of course, had no idea that the military unit would be so huge. The supply of weapons in the building would likely be limited, so they needed to be used as sparingly as possible. Michael noticed a drone from above. He explained to Mike that the new building would operate on the same principle as the logistics center. Once the items are analyzed, they can be used in the same way as in the center, and all the weapons he finds can be duplicated. However, a full analysis will take time, but he could name the items he needed at the moment, and Pax would assign them a code first. It would take about 10 minutes to assign a code. Mike needed grenades and firearms, and if available, transportation and fuel. Michael asked Pax to stop ordering products from other people. He opened a portal to check what was going on outside. The situation seemed worse than ever. Among the wyverns, there were some that seemed difficult to kill. But Michael and Ethan were ready to confront them. They had about 10,000 rounds of ammunition prepared. They also had an endless supply of machine guns. Michael asked if Ethan could shoot. He was ready to try his hand, and he did it quite successfully. Although it was a bit difficult to fire a full salvo for the first time, it seemed like they had it all figured out. But Michael knew it wasn't over yet. Among the killed wyverns, they did not see any particularly large individuals. They decided to try to set out the toy as bait, in case the monster was preparing an ambush for them. If there is no reaction, then they can move on. They placed a dummy on a remote-controlled toy car as bait, and they let us through the portal. A huge claw immediately pierced him. The wyvern seemed incredibly huge and enraged. Michael gave the command to shoot, but the monster turned out to be too smart and stepped aside. They stopped firing for a moment to see if they could kill him, but he suddenly appeared from the haze and rushed towards them. Luckily, the portal didn't let him through. They were surprised that the wyvern was indifferent to their attacks. Then Michael remembered the commandant's words. He said that the monster could block attacks. Michael threw a grenade at him. Maybe this time they will succeed. Ethan threw another one. Together they threw a large number of grenades at him. Throwing grenades turned out to be much harder for them than firing a machine gun, but the monster was still alive. Despite the large amount of explosives, there were only a few scratches on him. He couldn't understand what kind of monster this was. Suddenly he turned around and flew away. They were surprised, although relieved, even though they understood that he did not do this because of their attacks. It was time for them to move out. The guys still couldn't get over the shock of what they saw. The grenade proved to be an effective weapon, but not in terms of explosive power. Michael could use rockets, but the large explosion could have caused harm to people in the area. And besides, it's not a fact that it would help. It was necessary to find an alternative and attack with something heavy and fast. Well, besides rifles and grenades, they had nothing now. He decided to check how many magic stones he currently had in stock. And he was surprised to learn that he had 314 stones. He spent most of the stones on improving his abilities, after which there were 189 pieces left. And the last thing he opened was a laboratory. Michael asked to stop for a moment. They only had a short drive left before they reached Gangnam. Ethan allowed Michael to return to the portal and assured him that he could continue on his own. If Michael is really worried about this, he can just leave the portal open in the car. Michael climbed into the portal and told Ethan to be careful. Inside, the laboratory turned out to be spacious. He opened the system window to read what functions were provided to him. Michael thought about the fact that he now had the opportunity to combine a rifle and a magazine, and the safety ring can be removed from the grenade. Until Michael uses it to send it, it will not be able to undergo physical processes. He came up with the idea of combining a rifle with multiple magazines to create a powerful weapon. Meanwhile, Ethan's road was blocked by a bunch of cars. It looked very strange. Michael looked out to see if everything was okay. And I was also shocked to see a wall of cars. They will make it difficult to drive. Ethan wanted to turn around, but Michael had an idea, and he told him that he had just come up with a new weapon. Then, from the portal behind, large barrels flew towards the cars, which successfully blew them up. Ethan was in complete shock. On the other side, two men were watching what was happening, and they were clearly not happy that the wall was destroyed. They noticed a car approaching. The first thing they thought was that there might be military personnel in the car. Michael emerged from the car and asked if Nurse Emma was there. When he was a child and he and his sister often fought, Emma tried to calm them down because she couldn't prepare for the exam. The children were surprised by their older sister's diligence in terms of studying, and they didn't forget to make fun of her. Emma was never known for her perseverance, so her attitude worried the whole family. But she explained this by saying that she had a dream. She was ready to take care of the sick, even if the end of the world came. Although the younger ones could not accept her dream and continued to think that she had gone crazy. However, her dream was not fleeting, and she put in a lot of effort. Eventually, she was able to enter medical school. Now Michael was finally able to meet her, and I couldn't hold back my tears of joy. And Ethan quietly watched from the side. Michael introduced Emma to Ethan. She wanted to treat them to some chocolate, but they had already eaten too much. He told her that they had a patient for her. She was immediately ready to help him. Michael told her that the man was not here, but was in a space that could only be reached with the help of his power. But he couldn't open the entrance in front of strangers, so they headed to a secluded room, and the choice fell on the restroom. Emma was shocked when she found out what Michael was capable of. They brought her to the soldier. Michael said that they found him on the way, and that he was tortured. Emma's prognosis was grim, and the man would likely not survive. However, her healer powers awakened. Her powers weren't yet upgraded, and the healing would take time. But the soldier would survive. That was all she could do for now. The main thing now was to feed him after waking up. Michael decided to play a joke on his sister by remembering her phrase from childhood. Emma demanded answers to her questions about where Michael had been all this time, and they decided to talk over food. He told her everything from the beginning, but she missed half of it while she ate. After all, she really liked the food. During this time, Chloe prepared a restroom with beds and other things and suggested that they settle in there. And then she left them alone. She asked how they got there, but Michael wasn't going to tell her everything again. The only thing he told her was that his plan was to move the entire family into subspace, and his next stop was the city where the second sister was located. But Emma said she would stay here. Michael thought it was about the sick people who would stay here. But there were other nurses, so the problem was different. The head of the department looked out the window. He was informed about two new arrivals and was told that one of them was the nurse's brother. They hoped that the new arrivals would not be hostile to them and came here simply to eat and spend the night. In any case, they had an ace up their sleeve, the ability of one of the men. The head of the department ordered him to warmly welcome the newcomers. The strong man also restored the wall of cars that had been destroyed. At the same time, Emma told Michael about this head of the department, whose name was Andrew, that he could control people with the help of poisoning. Of all those awakened, only Emma remained with herself, and the rest became like drug addicts. And all this time she was gradually stealing magic stones to strengthen her ability. She wanted Michael to go look for their family, and she to stay here. Michael turned her down. However, Emma insisted on it. Michael realized that the main problem was that the manager had a stock of food, and he was confident that he could solve this problem in no time. Emma thought that Michael was simply experiencing teenage rebellion, and I didn't expect at all that boxes filled with food would now fall out of the portal above. The manager was informed that Michael had brought food with him, but Andrew wasn't worried about that, because he thought they had brought a few supplies, and he was sure that people would take everything from them, and they would be left with nothing. But his assistant informed him that Michael's food supplies were much larger than their own. They wondered how this was possible. These supplies, which were in the hospital, were delivered by scouts, and the newcomers arrived only in a regular military vehicle. Andrew wondered what kind of ability Michael had. He handed over a vial of an unknown liquid to his assistant so that he could give it to the person who would force Michael to drink it, and, if he failed, kill him. And of course, they didn't forget about one more person along with Michael. Michael, meanwhile, made his way into one of the rooms in search of someone. But this turned out to be not the person he needed. His and his sister's plan was to pour food into the man's mouth, thereby curbing his drug-addicted tendencies. She decided to tell him what abilities she had encountered in people. Some could open jars, and others had the ability to wash clothes for them. And she explained that despite the fact that most people have weak abilities, there is a person who was not included in their list. His name was Mason. When it all started, he came to their hospital looking for his mother. All she knew about him was that he was very strong and so big that it was hard not to recognize him. And he was the one who built the wall of cars outside. The strong man, noticing Michael, called him to talk. He agreed because he also wanted to meet him. Mason was clearly not in the mood for friendly conversation. He offered Michael two options: or drink the medicine from the bottle, or die. But Michael immediately said that he had no intention of running away, and it was unlikely that he would be able to. He had his own option. This was a trap option for Mason. Without thinking, he rushed to attack Michael, but he couldn't get through the portal. At first he couldn't understand what was going on, and then a bowling ball flew at him at full speed. Michael expressed insincere sympathy, and then he threw another ball at him. Then he lowered the heavy barrels he had built next to him. Even though Michael slowed them down, they could still do a lot of damage. Mason wrapped his arms around them and lifted into the air. But the barrels kept falling, so Mason had no choice but to keep placing them around. This played into Michael's hands. Mason didn't fully understand yet, but he had driven himself into a trap, from which Michael promised to free him as soon as everything was resolved. His sister ran out to meet him. She was worried that Michael might run into Mason, and she was taken aback when Michael said that he had just returned from meeting him. Through the window, Emma saw a barricade in which Mason was trapped. When she asked him how this had happened, he didn't want to explain at length. The food had been distributed to other people, and now all they had to do was wait for Ethan. When they noticed him, a worried expression appeared on their faces. He walked as if he was ready to fall at any moment. He had a very bad headache. As it turned out, this was one of the symptoms of poisoning. When asked what happened, Ethan replied that he himself did not know, because he was simply sharing food and receiving gratitude in return. Emma noticed a cut on her finger. She suggested that someone accidentally stabbed Ethan and then poisoned him. They helped take him back to subspace, and now they'll have to keep him away for a while. This was very bad, because in theory, Ethan could submit due to poisoning. He wanted to send Ethan to the break room and lock the doors and windows. But the system said that all unidentified energy would be blocked if it tried to enter, and Ethan's headache stopped. Now they had a new idea. They asked the system to grant Mason login access, and then he got into the portal. A couple of minutes later, he was thrown back. Now he was out of control. From that moment on, they became confident that the system also blocked mental attacks, and Mason was able to return to his mother. He assured her that everything was fine, and now she needed to rest. Mason was ready to join Michael's team. After all, he felt guilty for everything he had done, and he was grateful to Michael for bringing him back to his previous state. After that, he turned around and left. The guys weren't sure that Mason would be okay, but they had enough work of their own. Meanwhile, Andrew was in his office, and Mason came to visit him. He didn't know how Mason had managed to break ties with Andrew, but he decided that a simple apology would be enough to atone for his guilt. Alas, Mason came here not to forgive him, but to take revenge. At this time, Michael and others were discussing the possibility of curing people of addiction using subspace. There was no need to try hard to implement the plan, because a simple finger entering the subspace would be enough to achieve the result. But they didn't even have time to start implementing their plan. How people one by one began to come to their senses. Michael couldn't understand this change in behavior until Mason returned to them. Thanks to him, they no longer had to run around the hospital. Michael decided he should thank him for that, and he apologized for the bowling ball incident. Mason admitted that this was the first time he saw barrels made from discs as a weapon. Sometimes Michael himself was surprised by this. The strong man asked if they were going to stay in the hospital, because in fact, that's what he would want. But Michael wanted to find the remaining family members. Mason accepted his answer meekly. The guy mentioned that they were just heading to the city Mason came from, but Mason wasn't sure they could get there. Before parting, the jock thanked him again for the food and supplies, and I hope to meet everyone again someday. They said goodbye, and the guys set off on their journey. Ethan wondered what wall Mason had told them about. Perhaps it was someone's ability. Michael hoped that he would be able to communicate with the person who created it. Otherwise, they would not be able to pass so easily. Mason told them that when he left his town, a wall went up between the two towns. He wasn't sure how big she was, and perhaps by now she was even bigger than she was. He also noticed that the monsters here and in his city were somewhat different. There were more skeletons in that city, who, moreover, were resurrected. Despite the whole situation in that city, he was not worried about his sister. After all, he was completely confident in her abilities. Michael received a notification from the system about an incoming call from his sister. He opened a portal to find out why she was calling him. Emma told him that the soldier had woken up. The soldier thanked them for saving him and introduced himself as John, a lieutenant colonel who had once headed one of the corps in the Ministry of Defense. Michael also introduced himself. John didn't seem to fully understand where he was, but he could still see the headquarters from the outside. Michael explained that this was all a logistics center that was created with his power, and they were now in Gangnam. John looked quite surprised. Emma explained to him once again that they were now in subspace, but outside of it, in Gangnam. John asked to be dropped off here, but Michael and Ethan tried to assure him that they had no bad intentions. But the problem wasn't that John thought of them as a threat. He said he simply wanted to address the Joint Chiefs of Staff. Michael reluctantly agreed to this, and asked Pax to bring banana milk and a sandwich. If he was going to drop him off, he couldn't let him go hungry. He set him a condition. He had to eat it all and tell him what happened. John didn't really want to talk. So, as a way of persuasion, Michael showed him a table covered with various delicacies. John bought it and told them that at some point, monsters gradually began appearing all over the world. However, not only monsters appeared, but also insects, animals, and even terrain. The monsters were uncontrollable, so they attacked everything they could, even their own. At this time, the government was searching for and recruiting awakened people to form a new unit, and they were doing a very good job of it. However, things didn't go according to plan when they came across a monster. After all, none of the weapons in their arsenal helped destroy it. They tried to contact the command and military units. However, there was no response. As a result, they had no choice. They decided to retreat to the communications command. Many died then. At that time, they recruited awakened ones to resist and move forward. And after a few days, we were able to get there. However, the building was already empty, and the documents he found in one of the boxes said that a coup was being planned in the country. After that, he tried to contact the Joint Chiefs of Staff but he was trapped. He couldn't escape the dragon, and the awakened killed the soldiers and took control of the building. He assumed that the First Corps was preventing the government from gathering troops, and it seemed that the head of the command was also on their side. And most likely, all this was being done secretly. Michael understood everything, but offered to let him off after they passed the bridge. But John was not against landing now, but Michael wasn't listening anymore. He and Ethan were discussing the possibility of getting there as quickly as possible. John was curious how Michael managed to save him and stay safe after meeting the dragon. And when the portal opened in front of him, he saw an orc on the other side and panicked. However, the guys were too calm, and at that moment, a huge barrel of discs flew at the orc. He froze, watching what was happening in shock. How could anyone even think of this? Michael asked Pax to give them a military vehicle. He told John to eat and rest while they were gone. But just in case, he left the portal open so that John could observe what was happening outside. John was still puzzled by the vastness of Michael's abilities. The whole time they were driving, John watched through the window, half emerging from the portal. At first he didn't trust what he saw, but now I realized that all this is real. And besides, all discs were automatically restored, and magic stones were obtained from killed monsters. Ethan drew their attention forward, because it is impossible to drive across the bridge due to the cliff. Michael felt embarrassed about what he had said earlier, but he did not despair. John told them not to worry about it. Despite everything, the journey from Gangnam to the bridge took only an hour, and that was very fast. Now John also admired Ethan's abilities as a driver, even though he felt a little seasick. Although he was undoubtedly crazy about the skills of both. They stopped at another bridge, which was in poor condition, but no worse than the previous one. Ethan suggested that it might be possible to drive along it. But in the distance, Michael noticed something that looked like a wall, and realized that they couldn't get through there by car. They weren't sure if they could do anything about the wall at all. They had to get there first anyway. They agreed to drop John off in the nearest area. After getting out of the car, John thanked them, and they said goodbye. Now they could head to the city they needed. Michael thought about moving the wall into subspace, but that probably wouldn't work. Besides, he didn't have enough stones to level up. Then John invited them to go with him. He said that the government could give them magic stones because it supported the growth of the awakened. If they agreed to cooperate, they would be given help. But Michael didn't want to stay, because family came first for him, and he was sure that they would be able to obtain the magic stones themselves. However, he wondered whether this committee might have a helicopter. John was surprised, but confirmed that there really was one. At this time, the chief stood at the map and discussed their losses. Assessing the situation, he was not sure whether the government still existed. After all, the situation was rapidly moving for the worse. One of the soldiers came in to report something. He said that someone came. It turned out to be a survivor from the Corps, and he had news to convey. At first, the man did not believe what he heard, but he still went to meet him. They talked about something for a long time. Then John handed the man some paper. He looked out the window and noticed a military vehicle. They came out to thank Michael and Ethan for the work they had done. He was informed that Michael wanted to exchange supplies for a helicopter, and even though helicopters were important to them, it could be done. But there was one condition. He wanted Michael to become a soldier. Michael wasn't too opposed, but saving his family still came first for him. In that case, the man was not sure that he would be able to provide him with a helicopter. Michael did not rise to this provocation, simply wished them well, and was about to leave. This answer turned out to be disadvantageous for them. The man knocked on the car window and said he had a favor to ask. If they help him in this matter, then he will provide them with a helicopter. He said the location where the reserve forces were being assembled was at the Seoul train station, and contact with it was still being maintained. But the problem was that their way was blocked by skeletons. They were not so much dangerous in combat as they were annoying. There was a core in their chest that had to be destroyed. Otherwise, they would continue to be reborn. Michael realized that the man wanted him to destroy the skeletons and help the awakened ones get out. For him, this was no problem. After this, all the awakened people were taken out of there. Michael recalled the words of the man who warned them that in addition to ordinary skeletons, there were also rather strange ones, which were called skeleton knights. he advised to avoid fighting in case of a clash. After all, attacks had no effect on such monsters. Now, the guys knew this from their own experience. The skeleton spoke in an unknown language that no one understood. Then he squeezed the magic stone in his hand and crushed it. He introduced himself as Gawain, one of the 12 knights serving the king. Michael had no idea that the stone could be used in this way. Gawain asked why humans were invading their territory, and tried to put pressure on the sense of morality. No matter how many discs were thrown at him, he dodged all the attacks. Ethan was ready to scream with panic. Michael thought that in that case, something round that could bounce off when hit would be useful. He unlocked the trackable shipping feature, and again he tried to throw a barrel of discs at him. The skeleton thought this action was rather stupid, but this time he couldn't dodge. Although it did not cause him any serious damage, Gawain had already thought that this was all Michael was capable of, until a bowling ball flew at him, and then another one, and another one. Michael had thought out this entire attack with the utmost care. Now Ethan was able to calm down a little. Michael knew that this was far from the end, as it would be difficult to defeat the knight due to his armor, and it is unknown how much longer he will be able to hold it back. While they were distracting the enemy, it was necessary to send vehicles with people, and Gawain muttered a curse as attacks were launched at him, and they noticed with surprise that there were many more pieces of debris flying from it than before. Eventually, with the help of the discs, they were able to deliver a powerful blow. The skeleton was amazed by Michael's powers, but said that this was far from the end. After his death, 3 magic stones fell out of him. 2 small pieces turned out to be a fragment of a larger stone, and the third was a strengthening stone. Everyone was very happy that he was defeated. The man was surprised that, despite the warning, they confronted the skeleton and defeated it, and he offered them to join them again. However, Michael refused. But the commander asked Michael to think about it again after he saved the family. Michael felt a little burdened by their high expectations. After all, he understood that if there had been 2 knights there would not have been a wet spot left of them. And the problem was that there were 11 more of the same skeletons. And it was also unclear how strong their king was. He was concerned with the question of how the bowling ball was stronger than the projectile. The man mentioned that John told him that they were heading to Yulgiro. Michael confirmed this. The man asked if they knew that a wall had appeared there, and said that their military had gone there to reconnoiter. But now they have lost contact with them, so they sometimes conduct reconnaissance from the air. And, fortunately, judging by the activity, the people inside are still alive. And since their soldiers are safe, then Michael's family members are too. Michael wasn't too worried about it, though. The man reported that they had previously discovered that the top of the wall seemed to taper off and form a roof. They weren't sure if it would be completely closed. But you can get there by helicopter. Although he looked extremely unreliable, Michael wasn't sure it would fly at all, and it would be a miracle if it didn't explode. But the man pointed his hand to another place, and the other helicopter looked much better than the previous one. Ethan was very excited about the opportunity to fly a helicopter. The man explained that he decided to give them a new one because he considered the 2 of them his allies. Ethan was full of anticipation about getting behind the wheel of the Black Hawk. The man asked if Ethan had flown a helicopter before, but this was supposed to be his first time. The problem was that the ability to fly a helicopter would cost him 50 magic stones. He noted that the important factor was not the level increase, but getting a driver's license. The man decided to help them a little more, and provided 200 magic stones as a gift. They did not expect such a generous gift, but they thanked him. Ethan only needed 50 of them, so he left the rest with Michael. He was now confident in his ability to fly aircraft, although Michael was a little worried about his expression. There was still some time before the flight, so Michael had the opportunity to at least prepare himself mentally a little. While Ethan was busy, he decided to check what he currently had in his arsenal. The system informed him that if Michael transformed 2 large stones into 200 small ones, the total number of all stones would be 1,393. Even though Michael killed a lot of skeletons, he didn't think there would be so many stones. So he decided to spend some of it on increasing the level of the subspace. The question was where to use the strengthening stone. According to the system's explanation, This stone had the ability of fire, attached to an object and enhanced its properties, giving it the same abilities as the skeleton knight. He decided to enhance the properties of a bowling ball by turning it into a fireball, and asked Pax to re-register the product. Ethan announced that they were about to take off. The man wished him luck and hoped that Michael would be able to save his family. After completing the level up, some additional new features were unlocked. The man did not lose hope that they would return and perhaps want to become military men. But he was a little worried by Michael's expression, and he thought he had done something wrong. However, he was shocked by the new items that were discovered. The main drawback of Subspace was that it was difficult to store unregistered items in a category. But now Michael could register new items as long as they fit the categories of Logistics Center and Military Unit. And the helicopter they were currently on fell into one of those categories. To register a helicopter in Subspace, 107 magic stones were required. The man turned around when he heard the sound of a helicopter approaching. He couldn't understand why they had returned and thought that perhaps the transport was faulty. But they returned to drop another identical helicopter from the portal. After that, Michael waved goodbye, and the man stood there discouraged. The Skeleton King sat on his throne in the castle. No matter how much he thought, he couldn't understand. After all, in order to get to this dimension, a high-level being had to decrease in strength. In addition, he had made all the way to him and killed one of his skeletons. His advisor said that Gwaine contacted him before he died and said that he tried to talk to the mage, but he was attacked. He considered him a dangerous creature and was ready to kill him on command. The king considered this magician his rival, so the idea of killing him didn't seem so bad. However, there was no need for killing right now. They needed to get new fortification stones. He was going to go get them as soon as the harvest was over. But the advisor felt that someone had entered the castle. The king guessed who it might be and decided not to pay attention to them. Meanwhile, the guys had almost reached the right place. But landing the helicopter proved difficult. And the problem wasn't the size of the helicopter, but the fact that below, the skeleton knight was fighting some other monster. Michael looked closer. Some girl caused serious damage to the skeleton. Although Ethan was interested in watching this fight, he was not particularly keen on lowering the helicopter. Michael told him that his sister was downstairs. She couldn't understand why the skeleton was still alive after her blow. When she was little, she loved watching martial arts programs on TV. That's why she often had fights with her brother, and even on the playground, there was no one who could become her equal rival. Her parents decided to send her to a boxing school. Despite her first defeat, she was full of enthusiasm. She had a desire and passion for all types of fighting, and in high school she was already unrivaled. But an accident happened, and she suffered an injury, which forced the fight to be postponed. Despite this, she decided to continue training, although she kept getting more and more injuries. Michael said that last year, at the age of 24, she made her debut. He asked Ethan to lower himself a little so he could throw the bowling ball. The Skeleton Knight had only one question for her. He didn't understand why his attacks weren't reaching her. It was because he was slow. However, the skeleton was sure that it was not a matter of speed, but rather the girl's technique. But she believed that she had nothing of the sort. Even though they were rivals, he recognized her strength. He believed that she could well become a worthy knight, because he rarely met someone like her. He gave her some time to leave the castle and offered to talk to the King of Knights. Otherwise, he would be forced to kill her. But at that very moment, a bowling ball flew at him, and it shattered into pieces. She was surprised that some ball managed to break it, but she couldn't do anything. The stones obtained from the skeleton were returned to the open portal. A girl named Jessica looked up and noticed a helicopter. He landed right in front of her. Michael got out of the helicopter. Jessica didn't expect to see her brother here. Michael, Emma, and Jessica decided to have lunch together, and at the same time, talk about her abilities. Because Emma thought that Jessica's power was in creating a transparent barrier, with the help of which her sister's physical abilities were enhanced. But Jessica was confident that she was good even without the barrier. Emma advised her to eat more slowly as Jessica greedily stuffed her mouth with food. Now that all three had met, they could move on. But Jessica wanted to know why Michael got such a cool ability. He wasn't going to explain anything in detail yet, so he told her to rest and to contact Pax if anything happened. He also reminded her not to forget to say hello to Ethan's family, who were also there. Michael had to leave now. The castle's ceiling was likely to close soon. They were running out of time. Moreover, Michael needed to collect a few more magic stones. But he didn't make it, and the ceiling closed. They tried to use a helicopter to punch a hole in the wall with balloons, but it didn't work. The only option left was to send this place into subspace, but it was unreliable. Moreover, Michael used up almost all the magic stones to give the helicopter to the military. Now it has become much more difficult to increase your level. Jessica appeared from behind. She thought about the skeleton's words earlier. She mentioned that the skull told her that she would die if she stayed here. But he could spare her and ask the King of Knights about it. But alas, Michael destroyed it with a bowling ball. Michael was worried that they had little time left to find the King of the Knights. However, Ethan could get them there in just 5 minutes. The king's advisor told him that another knight had died and was unable to strike the girl. The king wondered if this could be the work of a magician, and the skull confirmed that it was quite possible. Now the king was ready to deal with the people who were bothering him. The advisor added that they were already heading towards the castle, and out the window he saw a helicopter flying up. Michael looked pretty bad after Ethan's flights. So bad that the king mistook him for an undead. For now, he wasn't going to interfere, because perhaps others could handle them. After landing, Michael vomited. He vowed never to fly in a helicopter again. Before he could even come to his senses, a monster attacked him. But his sister dealt the monster a powerful blow. He flew off some distance. Michael was grateful to her for her help, but she was sure there was someone else here. There were another 100 of the same red-eyed monsters hiding in the darkness. Michael asked Ethan to hide in subspace, and Jessica liked this environment. Michael wanted to stop her, but she rushed first, and she dealt blow after blow. One of the monsters almost bit through her neck, but Jessica brushed it aside. Michael watched from the sidelines, imagining how much fun his sister was having there. He wanted to find a way to help her somehow. One way was found. During this time, Jessica continued to fight the monsters, but the monsters stopped and looked somewhere in the other direction. Jessica turned around and noticed an open portal. There was an electric mosquito repellent there, and Michael sat calmly in the chair. Jessica didn't understand what he was doing, but he explained that he was just trying to help her. Although she didn't consider it help, at this time a skull was watching them. He told the king everything he had seen. He also mentioned that besides the magician, there was also a person whose abilities could be compared to those of a knight. This news was a headache for the skeleton. He needed Lancelot's help. After all, he realized that Michael's strength was greater than his. And he had an ally with him, with the same strength as the knight. Now their plan was for one of the skulls to sacrifice its life and give up the stone. And this stone was supposed to go to Lancelot. Meanwhile, Michael combined a mosquito repellent and a baseball bat. Jessica thanked him for the weapon. However, Michael warned her that when combining 2 items, the item's power is reduced, but the weapon is still quite good. Michael noticed that Jessica scratched her neck from time to time. Michael suggested that the bite might turn her into a vampire or something like that. But for now, everything was fine with her. She asked Michael to kill her if anything happened because she didn't want to become a monster. After that, they met with the King of Knights. He had a couple of questions for Michael. He couldn't understand why Michael kept causing them problems. He assumed that Michael was a magician who came from some arcane. The guys had no idea what he was talking about. The king realized that it was pointless to enter into dialogue with them, so he gave the order to Lancelot to kill them. Jessica didn't feel an ounce of fear. She was sure that there was no need to worry about her. It was then that Lancelot struck his first blow, so powerful that dust rose up all around. The bat couldn't hold up for long and eventually broke. Michael was surprised because even though the bat was semi-rare, it still broke under the skeleton's attack. The problem was clearly not in the bit, but in the strength of the knight. Michael rarely heard his sister call anyone strong. He asked Jessica to give him some of the magic stones since he had spent most of them on making the bat, but she clearly wasn't going to share. The next second, fireballs flew at Lancelot, but he cut them down without any problems. Jessica rushed to attack and managed to hit him in the face. She dodged his attacks without any problem, but she still couldn't destroy him with such blows. After that, another ball flew at him, which knocked him off his feet. But not for long. Michael was surprised that there was still not a scratch on the knight. Now Michael had a bad feeling. He used the goods return function and made a strategic retreat into subspace. The king ordered the knight to catch up with them. Jessica wasn't particularly happy about it, but Michael felt like the situation was getting out of control. They understood that it would be quite difficult to deal with him. For a second, the knight disappeared from their sight and then appeared right in front of the portal, trying to break through it with his sword. And Michael thought he could do it. He destroyed all the attacks that came out of the portal, even though they had just flown out of the portal in front of him. All this time the king was watching from behind. He already understood their fighting tactics. The skeleton could admit that if they were on the same level, Michael could well win. But it was almost impossible to deal with Lancelot. He knew that he would most likely be sanctioned for calling up such a fighter. But he didn't care. Without Lancelot, he would hardly have survived and would have lost everything he had. But since he was destined to die anyway, he would rather be punished by the Chamber of Commerce. To be honest, this miserable battle was a little disappointing to him. If he had known that things would turn out this way, he would not have called Lancelot. He thought that Michael was a rather strange boy. After all, he had never used magic in all this time. The king was sure that it would be easier to use magic than to waste items. Meanwhile, Michael was thinking about how to get rid of the knight, since it was difficult to make a new weapon. And until he had enough magic stones, the only thing he had left were bowling balls. However, the balls were of no use. The king ordered everyone to stop. He guessed that Michael was a human, not a magician, and I realized that he could duplicate objects. It was foolish to assume that a magician would show up in such a place. The skeleton ordered Lancelot to put away his sword and suggested that they could be partners. The idea of partnership daunted them. The king thought about how to explain it to them. He told them that the power stones they had received on their way here for killing the skeleton knights could be created in this castle. The castle itself was called Camelot, and it could produce stones in exchange for creatures. The skeleton explained that stones are used not only on ordinary objects, but also on those that have special functions. If they are in Camelot, they can use the stone to summon one of the 12 knights, including Lancelot. However, the Power Stone is quite a valuable commodity, and Michael can copy objects, so the king suggested that they work together to create copies. He was sure that Michael would not be able to refuse this offer. Michael acted like he was incredibly grateful for the offer, and then he took and transferred Camelot into subspace. The king was perplexed, and Camelot turned out to be very small, the size of a toy. The king was angry at Michael for taking his castle. He decided to use his monstrous attack on them, but this did not harm the portal in any way, and Michael asked Lancelot to kill the King of Knights. He obeyed. The skeleton did not expect such an outcome of events, but he didn't have time to do anything, and Lancelot got rid of him. After the king's death, ownership of the dimension passed to Lancelot, and, accordingly, to Lancelot's owner, Michael. He now had 3,086 stones at his disposal. Jessica wanted Michael to give her at least 1,000 stones for saving her life, but Michael had no intention of giving away such a quantity. He agreed to 500. Now the question remains what to do with Lancelot. To everyone's surprise, Ethan's daughter became friends with Lancelot. Lancelot explained that by helping his lord's men, he was helping him too. The boys noticed that he was quite careful when playing with the little girl, so he may be a pretty good person. But Michael was confused by Emma calling Lancelot a person. Now they had to move on to the next area. Emma hoped they wouldn't leave right now because she noticed that Michael hadn't been resting properly for the past few days. She suggested that we rest at least for the night and set out at dawn. Ethan was a little jealous that his daughter had turned her attention to Lancelot and now didn't really want to play with him. Michael, watching this, decided that it was still worth resting. Ethan picked up his tired daughter and they arranged with Michael to leave around 6 in the morning. But now it was necessary to figure out where to prepare a place for Lancelot to sleep. The Camelot that was in Michael's hand had many rather useful functions, but now he was only concerned with the function of installing Camelot. However, it did not indicate how much it would cost to place the castle so that 12 knights could stay in it. Michael decided to spend about 300 stones and did not expect Camelot to be so big. He asked if the knights could live in this castle. It was no problem for them. However, for the previous king, this castle would have been too small. Jessica couldn't even imagine how much the king could have spent on the size of this castle. Lancelot guessed at least 10,000. Michael, however, thought about the fact that, surprisingly, there were no consequences in subspace from the fact that he placed a castle of such size here. He wondered why Jessica had not gone to rest. However, she had business with Lancelot. She had a request for him. She wanted him to teach her the art of swordsmanship. Lancelot agreed, but he had a request in return. He wanted her to teach him that punch she had used before. She agreed and was positively beaming with impatience. After that, Michael went to rest, and Jessica sparred with Lancelot, and they were able to accept him into their family. In the morning, they noticed a group of military men on their way. Ethan assumed that someone else had decided to go on the journey besides them, although this seemed strange. A helicopter flew overhead. Ethan recognized him. Henry appeared from the helicopter. They were glad to see him again. And he flew because he saw that the fortress wall had disappeared. Michael thought Henry was there to try to convince him again. However, he had come because he had important news to tell. Now it was impossible to move around by helicopter, since the First Corps had captured the air defense base and was shooting down everything that flew through the air. So he's here to tell them that they'll likely have to take a big detour to another area. But he was not sure and could not recommend this route. Michael wondered what they should do next. They could have followed the route Henry had suggested, but it didn't quite suit them. Most likely, a clash with the rebels will be inevitable. And perhaps his entire family is now threatened not only by monsters, but also by rebels. There was no time to waste now. So he called Lancelot, and he said that now he is with them. He will be of great help in the fight against the rebels. Now all that's left is to come up with a plan. Despite his initial panic, he was glad of the outcome. Meanwhile, one of the monsters stood armed near the cannons and looked out over the territory. There were people in the cage behind him, and a skull watched everything that was happening from above. The thing is, Michael decided to use the summon ghosts function. The ghost has no physical contact with anything, so it can freely pass through walls or fly through the air. The summoning cost is 1 power stone and 500 magic stones, which is the same as the cost of anointing a knight. If you summon a knight, you can change his incarnation at any time without additional costs, which allows you to use him for reconnaissance. Therefore, the plan was for Lancelot to conduct reconnaissance of the enemy positions, determine the number of forces, as well as the location of the guns, and then develop a plan to overcome them. They approached almost to the line of contact, since the range of the ghost's movement was limited. And Lancelot completed the reconnaissance in 2.5 hours. Michael was shocked to learn that some parts of the soldiers had been turned into goblins, and that they were trapping people, and that the enemy numbers were over 200. Lancelot also said that they were going to transfer some of the train to a neighboring area, and that they only had 9 anti-aircraft guns. The situation was quite complicated. Michael was unclear why they were detaining civilians and who the mentioned priest and he were. Lancelot didn't know the answer to all the questions, but he guessed that the reason people were being held was to cause repulsion. He explained that for all beings of dimensions, there is a so-called hierarchy. The ranks that beings have give the right to protection from beings that are lower. Accordingly, the lower the level in the hierarchy, the stronger the repulsion will be. Including a rank 9 attack will not affect a rank 8 creature. Jessica thought that in that case they were sacrificing people to get that rank, and Lancelot could agree with that. But there was a nuance in that using sacrifices to gain rank was a method that low-intelligence creatures used instinctively. However, it also cannot be ruled out that in this case, deals with higher-level beings may be involved. Michael asked what kind of deals they were. Jessica seemed to be getting tired of standing around and wanted to quickly go and beat up those guys. But Henry suspected that their plan might be more dangerous than they could imagine. Although they had information on hand about the location of the brigade commander and the anti-aircraft guns, the problem was different. The point was that their line of defense was stronger than expected. And besides, they could have support from the First Corps. And if the First Corps provides them with support, then their chances of victory will be significantly reduced, and the entire battle may escalate into a full-scale war. Therefore, they had to capture them before the first corps arrived. An air attack would be very helpful, but due to the use of anti-aircraft guns, it is almost impossible. But they do not have time to wait for support. They could have relied on Lancelot's strength, and he could have easily destroyed them all on his own. But the territory was too large. Lancelot suggested calling another knight if the problem was with the anti-aircraft guns. But to summon, you needed a booster stone and magic stones. There were magic stones, but there was no booster. Alternatively, they could cancel Lancelot's summoning, take the stone, and then summon him again. But this would not add any strength to them. It would have been much easier if the Power Stone could be copied. But that was impossible. The skull reminded him that by defeating the King of Knights, he could obtain a power-up stone. And Michael didn't seem to remember having another power-up stone. But others remembered that there remained the stone that Lancelot had found. Lancelot said that no matter which knight Michael summoned, they would all be of outstanding ability, skill, and loyalty. But for this situation, Bedivere would be the best. This is a knight who is quite good at long-range attacks. For this reason, he was once called the greatest archer. At the same time, the situation with the hostages in the cages was worse than ever. Someone addressed the girl sitting in the cage. It was the goblin who suggested that she run away, but only if she fulfills one of his requests. However, before he could even finish speaking, his head was blown off, and the knight cut the lock on the cage. The girl watched what was happening in surprise. The goblins noticed something flying in the sky. They spotted a bowling ball, and they panicked when they realized that he was flying in their direction. A second later, he detonated their gun. Another goblin heard some strange sound, and at the same moment, another explosion occurred behind him. As it turned out, the balls were thrown by Bedivere. Earlier, Lancelot told Michael that Bedivere was one-armed. Michael was surprised that despite having only one arm, he was called a genius archer. Lancelot told him that Bedivere had once served as a knight for a duke, who had been so jealous of his talent that he had cut off his hand. After this, he decided to take a thick leather belt instead of a bow and use it to throw stones and spears. Michael was a little skeptical about Bedivere being able to destroy the anti-aircraft guns. Lancelot had worked with him for quite some time, so he was confident that he could handle it. He was confident that the two of them would be enough to destroy the enemy camp. Bedivere's strikes were lightning fast and accurate. While one of the goblins watched what was happening through the window, the other one has already suffered quite a lot. Lancelot stood behind them, and the 12 knights are not a circle that anyone could enter. Michael, meanwhile, was trying to figure out the account and the rate at which the number of magic stones was increasing. Ethan drew his attention. Fireballs flashed in front of them and exploded in the air. This was a signal that all anti-aircraft weapons had been destroyed. Henry and Ethan couldn't help but admire the abilities of these two knights. Bedivere was faced with a small problem at this time. After destroying the targets, he tried to figure out on the map where he should go next. And I got a little lost on the route. At this time, Lancelot was finishing off another goblin. He wanted to beat information out of him without accidentally killing him. He needed to know what their plan was and how many soldiers were in the First Legion. The goblin said that Tonatiuh taught them everything. According to him, it was such a powerful creature that Lancelot would not be fit to hold a candle to it. The knight had never heard of such a thing and tried to find out what he wanted from the goblins. The goblin shouted that he himself did not know and kicked Lancelot in the leg. And then he dodged and wanted to run away. He jumped out of the window, and he landed successfully, after which one of the soldiers ran up to him. But Lancelot wasn't going to let him go that easily. Everyone crowded around the goblin general, thinking they could protect him. The knight was surprised by their bravery, but also by their stupidity. The goblins were confident that they could put Lancelot in his place, as they had several level 8s in their main party. Plus, if they ate a few more people, they could become on par with Lancelot. The skeleton asked if all those who were turned into goblins did the same thing as he did. Green confirmed this. At that very moment, Lancelot killed one of the goblins standing nearby. Now it was easier for him to distinguish those who deserved death. The general ran away after the death of one of the soldiers. But when they looked up, they saw a helicopter above them. Ethan planned to land right now, although Michael wasn't thrilled with the idea. The soldier panicked because he thought government troops had arrived, and the general simply killed him so as not to listen to his screams, and with his help, he became stronger. Lancelot and Michael, who had exited the helicopter, watched this scene. His sight drove Michael crazy. Now the magic stones left by the dead soldier went to the general, and he became on the same level as Lancelot. Michael wanted to know why he lost all his humanity when he leveled up, but Lancelot assumed it was because he tried to level up too quickly. Lancelot was now on the 7th level, but Bedivere could have dealt with the goblin instead. He was glad that he went where he felt, and with the next blow he crushed the goblin. The chief of the operational headquarters came running to Michael. He reported that thanks to the 2 knights who were able to destroy the key object, they were now able to save the civilians more smoothly. He asked where the brigadier general had gone, but then saw a corpse on the asphalt. While Henry was surprised, Michael decided to find out from Lancelot if he had learned anything about the plans of the enemy. He had no new information now, other than that the higher being who was helping them was called Tonatiuh. The soldier suggested that they could look into the documents in the brigadier general's building. Perhaps they could find something there. Lancelot showed them where the room the general was in was, but they might have to sort through a lot of paperwork before they found what they needed. The boss told them not to worry and that they could do something like that. But Michael had another idea. He asked Pax to transfer all documents and maps of the military category into the subspace, which cost 120 magic stones. Michael was sure that this way things would go faster, and at this rate, he would sooner meet his family. However, among all the files, 2 inappropriate documents were found. These 2 papers were about the registration of a spatial being. Lancelot explained that this is a document that can increase the rating. One of the papers is an official document, and the one in poor condition is a fake document. What was strange to Michael was that even though they had the normal way, they were becoming goblins instead. But the knight thought that they simply couldn't register the normal way. In order to register an existence, magical stones and an account in the dimension were needed. But since Earth was still relatively new to development, there was no one who could meet such conditions. Michael's case was special. Since he killed a level 8 creature that had an account in the dimension, Michael got it. Even though this document should not have existed, Lancelot suggested that Michael register since there was such an opportunity. If Michael remembers the official application form, he will not become a goblin, since the application form is adapted to each dimension. But Michael was confused by the condition that 1,000 magic stones were needed. Nevertheless, he signed the paper anyway. And after the signature, the paper disappeared. It was unexpected that the registration went so quickly. At this time, one of the goblins just arrived with a motorcycle for the general. But there was nothing left of the general, and Bedivere looked down on them from above. The documents that Michael registered in the subspace amounted to about 40,000 sheets. They entrusted their inspection to Henry, and promised to return when Michael found his family. Since the area they needed was captured by the rebels, Michael decided to drive the car himself so as not to expose Ethan to danger. But they had a small problem in that the subspace was filled with military equipment. In their situation, a civilian car would be more suitable for them. In this case, Michael wanted to ride his bike and look for the necessary transport in the area. But Bedivere was already waiting for them on the street on a motorcycle. Michael was shocked that Bedivere had somehow acquired such a vehicle. Bedivere said that the motorcycle belonged to a red-haired goblin, and he just decided to take it away. And since they now had the general's motorcycle, Michael came up with a new plan. In that case, it was necessary to ride the motorcycle as close as possible to the next goblin base. And since the motorcycle was their frequent transport, they should not have suspected anything right away. However, one of them decided to get rid of the uninvited guests. A fireball flew at him and he didn't even have time to react. And Lancelot was already swinging his sword at the other one. He cut off his head, and Bedivere followed him. They stopped near a high-rise building, and having reached the right apartment, Michael wanted to know if his brother was still inside. But there was no answer, and Michael decided to open the door himself. The apartment turned out to be empty. Lancelot offered to go first to have a look around. It looked like the place had been attacked. and Michael thought his brother might have left the house. Michael noticed a small envelope on the table. It was a letter from his brother, which he had left in case they came back for him. The letter said that Jim decided to go to another city because his wife's family lived nearby. His brother didn't know if anyone would be able to read the letter, but he warned him not to go to Uijeongbu, as soldiers there were being kidnapped and forcibly taken right off the street. All his brother hoped for was that his family was alive. Michael was relieved that Jim and his family had managed to escape before the First Corps took over the territory. Michael asked Bedivere to deliver a letter to his sisters in subspace. The guy decided that they needed to move as quickly as possible, but a gun from a helicopter was already pointed at them through the window. There was a goblin behind the wheel and opened fire on the strangers, but it was no use. Michael asked Pax to keep the helicopter under military category. While the goblin was indignant, he did not notice how the plane he was in disappeared. Now that they had dealt with that problem, they needed to move on. They were equipped with magic stones, helicopters with missiles and guns. Now the main thing was that his brother was safe. Meanwhile, several more goblins were discussing the number of sacrifices to be made. They needed to destroy some building. The elder gave the other soldier an order and let him go. One of their sergeants had already managed to turn into an uncontrollable version of himself, and the goblin ordered him to go and break down the building. But everyone turned around when they heard sounds behind them. Michael was riding ahead on a motorcycle, yelling at them to get out, and he couldn't let them destroy the building. Lancelot already had his sword at the ready behind him, and Bedivere delivered his precise blows with the balls. At this time, there were people nearby, in a small shop nearby. One of the men recognized Michael as his son, but he was surprised that he arrived on a motorcycle with a skeleton. Michael's father recalled how he once had a dream. He wanted to build a big house where the whole family could live together, but it turned out to be more difficult than he expected. His family's life was going well, up to a certain point. When the monster showed up, luckily the man ran a hardware store, the items from which helped them survive the attack. But over time, food and water had to be saved more and more. And then the daughter-in-law's relatives and the eldest son joined them along with her. He knew how hard their journey had been, and he was very glad that they had managed to get here. Thanks to the daughter-in-law's awakened powers in the field of alchemy, they always had access to water. The soldiers they relied on became monsters and took civilians, regardless of gender. Adam was watching the scene from outside at the time, trying to figure out how to keep his children safe. And around this time, he discovered that he had the ability to be an architect. And so, thanks to his abilities and the abilities of his daughter-in-law, they were able to survive and build barricades against the goblins. This time, the monsters were determined to destroy their home. So Adam came up with a workaround. He told Jim to gather all the family members and go out into the hallway. Jim didn't want to leave without his father, but there was an emergency exit in case of a collapse. Adam would rather have his family there than here, but he was going to be the last to catch up with them. Through the peephole, he noticed that the monsters were moving much faster. Everyone had to leave. But something caught Adam's attention outside. Everyone watched his reaction with concern. And then he told everyone that Michael had arrived. Michael was sure that he had arrived at the right place, although he did not expect to find so many iron sheets and skewers here. The door in front of him suddenly opened, and his family looked out of the house. Michael immediately ran to hug everyone in joy. But others were horrified that there were skeletons of knights here. Michael tried to calm them down, and he opened a portal in which his sisters were. They, like Michael, burst into tears of happiness. Afterwards, Michael took everyone into subspace, and they sat down to eat. Linda was a little jealous of Ethan's wife's cooking skills. She even thought that she was a cook. But Linda wasn't going to give up and offered to make dessert. And she made her signature tiramisu with cream and green grapes. It was so delicious that Chloe asked for the recipe. Meanwhile, old William asked Lancelot if he knew how to play Changi. However, Lancelot was more famous for the fact that he and his comrades dismembered the corpses of monsters. So the old man decided to teach him to play. Jim wanted to show Michael something. In his hand was a strengthening stone. Jim said that he found this stone after two monsters fought nearby. He gave it to Michael, and he didn't refuse. He reminded Jim that if he needed anything, he could simply order it and take care of the comfort of his wife's family. Jim couldn't help but notice how his brother had matured in recent years. He said goodbye to Michael and went to his wife. Michael couldn't help but notice the scar on his brother's cheek, which indicated that he had apparently suffered a lot. Unnoticed by Michael, his father approached him. He was happy that the whole family was now safe, and everyone was able to eat their fill thanks to Michael's abilities. Adam decided to remind him of a phrase he had once said a long time ago about how good and bad things only happen when there are people. Michael said that without those who helped him, it would have been much harder for him. He was sure that if someone helped other people, then someone would help his family in the same way. Adam was very proud of his son. Michael credited his father's upbringing for all of this. At this time, Henry and his comrades continued to sort through stacks of papers. One of the soldiers came in to say that Bedivere had come recently, and he asked me to convey that Michael had left for Paju. And then it dawned on Henry that the first building was there. It was not the intended plan. But Michael, meanwhile, had already set off on his journey with Lancelot. Jessica, while in subspace, decided to practice. But it looked as if she was angry about something. She has already ruined quite a few punching bags. When Jim asked why Jessica was so angry, the answer was that Michael wouldn't let her go. After all, even despite her abilities, guns and tanks were still too dangerous. Jim couldn't understand why Jessica was so eager to get out. Emma learned that Jim had a scar on his cheek. But when he touched it, the scar suddenly disappeared. He was sure that the scar was quite large and that it had been on his cheek just recently. When he and Emma were about to quarrel, their mother called them to eat. Emma ran out first. She also called Ethan with his daughter and Adam, who were playing at the time, to the table. She asked if Adam's father would come to eat, but he replied that the old man would most likely not eat, because at that time he was thinking about the game. And William couldn't understand why Lancelot, playing for the first time, was so good at Changi. He even thought about asking the knight to explain his moves to him. At the same time, on Michael's way, they encountered tanks that dealt him merciless blows. But being in subspace, he was safe and could strike back with one of the missiles in his arsenal, which easily destroyed obstacles in their path. Michael decided not to use high-explosive weapons to avoid accidentally harming others. But thanks to Lancelot's intelligence, they learned that the First Corps was dispersed among areas that contained both civilians and rebels. Their plan was for Lancelot to be responsible for rescuing the hostages, and Michael, in turn, to attack the rebel forces. He also moved the Black Hawk to the lab to fix it, and reinforced it with a booster stone. And he didn't forget about Pax's long-delayed ability to move. After strengthening the ability, the range was 100 meters. And the maximum delivery speed is 300 kilometers per hour. Using the reinforced rocket, he planned to collect as many magic stones as possible in a short time. After all, to move into the subspace to the 4th level, 10,000 stones were needed. Michael had about 2,000. Suddenly, a problem arose that the number of magic stones stopped increasing. The system announced that 45% of the profits would be paid as commission to Tonatiuh, and 25% would be paid to Father Benjamin. Michael still didn't fully understand who they were, but the name sounded familiar to him. A memory of Lancelot's words came to his mind, that the higher being who had come into contact with the goblins was called Tonatiuh. Lancelot informed Michael that all the camps had been destroyed. Bedivere had also returned, but he would not join them now. After all, he would help people escape. He asked if Michael was hurt, but being in subspace, no one could harm him. Michael decided to check with the knight whether the supreme being who had made contact with the rebels was really Tonatiuh. He told him that this Tonatiuh and a certain priest kept intercepting his magic stones. He was also interested in what dimension Messica was from which Tonatiuh came. Lancelot assumed that it was most likely his home planet or civilization. In any case, now they needed to find this priest Benjamin. Meanwhile, Benjamin himself was discussing how magic stones appeared in the account at such a high speed. He also still didn't understand where those powerful explosions ahead came from. Why has no one come to tell him about this yet? He didn't think for long, because after that, a rocket flew through him, leaving a hole in his body, and throwing it back some distance. When Michael and Lancelot finally got to him, Michael thought he was going to die after climbing such a long staircase. The hole in the goblin's body, which was too big for him to survive, began to close up. They didn't expect such a turn of events, and the goblin returned to his previous appearance, as if nothing had happened. It was quite surprising to Benjamin that the skeleton knight was so devoted to a human. Although it was surprising to Michael, too. The goblin had already realized that they had met his soldiers before, and he told them that they had all eaten magic stones, which is why they had turned into goblins. At first, Benjamin thought of offering them something. He wanted them to stop destroying everything and leave this place. Then, he would leave them alone. He was sure that they wouldn't be able to kill him, but he could kill them right now. But he didn't want to get his hands too dirty and take unnecessary damage. Michael was confused by his sudden offer of peace. First of all, he needs to figure out if he can beat this man. If not, then maybe the smoke is the problem. It was probably smoke from the sacrifices. Lancelot had seen it, but Michael hadn't yet. Now, dark red smoke was gathering in the sky behind. A huge eye watched over them from above. Michael clearly didn't expect such a sight. The goblin understood that Michael was seeing a high-level being for the first time, and he told me that Tonatiuh would have to come here in person. He was the only one who could help him. The goblin was sure that they would now be trapped, but was willing to spare them if they would kneel before him. The boys were not going to obey him, and Lancelot struck his blow, cutting off the goblin's head. Lancelot clearly wasn't going to tolerate such insolence from some monster. However, the goblin turned out to be immortal. Lancelot was not going to give up, and wanted to try to make him wish for death, and he continued to finish him off. Despite the knight's efforts, the main goal now was to defeat Tonatiuh. Otherwise, the goblin would simply continue to regenerate. It was clear from one glance that it would be impossible to defeat this creature. It would be necessary to find at least some small way to at least interrupt the regeneration. Suddenly, he remembered the property of subspace. Michael called Lancelot and told him to throw the monsters into the portal. Emma happened to be passing by at the same time, and, noticing the activity of the portal, she thought that it was Michael returning. And she was terribly scared when a creature emerged from the portal, but without its previous abilities. Jessica stopped him from falling, trying to figure out what it was. And then I noticed Michael outside. She decided to take revenge on him and throw a corpse at him. Michael tried to close the portal as quickly as possible, but he still asked Pax to remove Benjamin from subspace. The corpse fell out of the portal, and Jessica was burning with the thought of revenge. For a moment, Michael was even more afraid of her than Tonatiuh. After the goblin's death, all of his stones were transferred to Michael's account, and the number increased to 14,823. It was unclear how much Benjamin earned in commission since he had so many stones. There was no notification from the Tonatiuh Commission, and he apparently just disappeared. Lancelot remembered Benjamin saying that he was the only one who could summon Tonatiuh, and now, most likely, the connection was cut off. Now Michael was able to relax a little after what he had been through. Even without fighting, he felt some kind of incomprehensible fatigue. Behind them, he heard a familiar voice. It was Henry who brought all the awakened and the units to help. They were worried that they would be late, and then they saw the captain's withered corpse on the floor. They were informed that after reconnaissance in and around the first building, it was discovered that all the rebels were mummified, and there were no survivors. So Henry ordered them to maintain combat readiness and engage in rescuing civilians and clearing the area. Despite the successful operation, Michael was a little annoyed that the commander had turned into a mummy. Henry decided to thank Michael for what he did, for he realized that it had been foolish to ask Michael to join the army in the first place. They had underestimated Michael's abilities and realized that the advantages they had offered him were of no use to him. However, he asked Michael to continue helping people. After all, someone lost loved ones, and some people received serious injuries. He realized that so much damage was caused by the incompetence of the government and the military, so he wanted to ask Michael for help. But Michael immediately said that this offer was not a deal, but help. And since he had no intention of joining the army, the decision whether to help or not would be a matter of his heart. Henry was glad that Michael finally agreed. Henry radioed to announce that he was promoting Michael to colonel for his great contribution to strengthening the armed forces and neutralizing the rebels. And after that, All soldiers must treat the honorary colonel with courtesy and cooperate when necessary. Michael was extremely embarrassed to hear this. After this, Michael was about to go and rest, but Lancelot reminded him that they had forgotten about Bedivere. Michael wanted to use the hidden object feature to find it, but he was outside a certain distance, so the system could not find him. Lancelot wanted to go look for his comrade himself, but Michael offered to go with him and level up packs along the way. Michael wondered, since the soldiers were taking care of the civilians and sorting out the situation, what Bedivere was doing at this time. And at that time he found the application form for registration of a spatial being. The knight thought that his lord would be pleased if he gave him these papers, which were in the office of the corps leader Benjamin. After Lancelot and Michael found Bedivere, he gave Michael the documents, for which Michael thanked him. In the subspace, his sisters were already waiting for him, eager to take revenge on him for his prank. Michael handed Jessica the paper and said that now, with its help, she would be able to fight with him without fear. But to do this, you needed an account, and Michael forgot about it. And Jessica hit him hard in the face, but he managed to pull himself together in time and began to run away from her. Emma told the knights not to interfere, as everything that was happening was the love of older sisters for their younger brother. Turning her head, she noticed that something was wrong with the knights. While Michael and Jessica were fighting, Emma called them to tell them that the knights were in a strange state, and it was unclear what the reason for their current state was. Lancelot said that his whole body began to itch and hurt like crazy. It used to itch, but now it's gotten much more intense. Jessica remembered that she had once been bitten, and that place had itched too. But after she entered the subspace, everything healed. It then dawned on Michael that due to the increase in the subspace level, the healing effect inside was increased. It was strange for Michael because he thought that what he saw was the original form of the knights, and Lancelot suggested going to Camelot, since he felt better there. In Camelot, a white strengthening stone was created. There was also a blue booster stone with electric shock properties. The white one had a resistance option. It was strange to him that the blood sacrifice option worked automatically. After all, he thought that it was an active skill that he had to use himself, but he himself did not feel any effect. The knights regretted having to show Michael their weak side, but the guy apologized for not paying attention to their pain all the time, and he suggested that in that case they should be in Camelot when they entered subspace. They were grateful to Michael that they could make a difference simply by relaxing. It was surprising that the life support system of subspace and the power of Camelot were two things with opposite characteristics. It was a fantastic harmony of infinite power. If you think about it, with the help of endless creation of strengthening stones, energy increases, and the scale of constant growth of abilities. Accordingly, the possibility of its application increases more. But catching Tonatiuh will still be difficult. To do this, you will have to become much stronger and get to know your abilities well. The Special Forces unit discussed the situation regarding the rebels and their methods of luring people. Without Michael's help, the coup might have actually succeeded. Now, Henry had to inform Michael of the additional supplies that were needed. Some troops had to be left behind and some sent back. With all the work going on, he didn't even have time to notice how morning had come. Suddenly, the system sent a notification from the Chamber of Commerce about new cases of blessing by internal projection. And thanks to this, the land has shown that it has sufficient potential for growth and profitability. The system also reported about a certain bidding competition that will be held for all regions of the Earth in 7 days. The inhabitants of the land must elect a representative for each region who will compete with others for potential profit. Now it looks like I'll have to greet guests. The sisters didn't really believe what was written at first, but Michael confirmed that the documents that gave him the 8th rank also said something about the Chamber of Commerce. In that case, the monsters on Earth were sent by its representatives. Linda was angry that these creatures thought they could do whatever they wanted on Earth. Michael couldn't answer all the questions. One thing was clear: the representatives of this chamber were not taking what was happening seriously. The system notified that Michael was chosen as the representative of Seoul because he had the highest profit in the last period. Jim suggested that in that case, Michael would have to participate in the bidding. It wasn't entirely clear what a bidding competition was, but Jim looked at the context. they will most likely have to compete with alien life forms. If Michael agrees to participate, he can select up to 100 participants for the bidding competition. Everything that was happening needed to be carefully thought out. Michael told Henry that he had agreed to be Seoul's representative and that he needed 100 members for the team. He had already managed to include his sister Jessica in the list, as well as the Knights, and just in case, members of his family, but they were still missing about 80 people. Henry was glad that Michael was the representative, because now he could rest easy. The man handed Michael a list of awakened people and their abilities that could help. But Michael would also benefit from special class snipers. Since Michael became a representative, he was given information that his rivals worship the goddess Emis and create weapons based on divine power. It was easier to show than to tell. The system provided them with a list of participants from the enemy side. And they were all knights, dressed in armor and well armed. So far, all Michael knew was that an hour before the auction began, both sides would take up positions and wait for the fight to begin. Then a protective barrier would be created and neither side could attack. With them will be the core of the gate. Once the competition starts, the core will automatically hatch in 12 hours. And the condition for winning is to destroy this core. The Eames dimension will win if the core hatches. Since Michael's team had many people who were rank 9, their enemies might think that they would be easier to attack. He, Lancelot, and Jessica would be able to attack. However, the problem was in defense, as it was necessary to block the 8th rank guys. Henry realized that Michael wanted snipers, because long-range weapons would be effective in repelling attacks. But their weapons would hardly work. But Michael said not to worry about it, as he had already managed to improve his abilities. While the abilities were upgraded, no new features were added, but existing abilities were improved. Now, the laboratory could simulate the characteristics and appearance of a product before creation. All that remains is to figure out what kind of weapon can be created. There was a need for something that could be used even by the inexperienced, and that could easily kill 8th rank fighters. He settled on improving the rifle and ammunition. After all, if you only improve the ammunition, the weapon itself will break. Because of this, he had to improve the weapon so that it could withstand the shots. Now their plan was to take these guns, fight off the enemies, and destroy the core of the gate. Henry was delighted and went to prepare a list of snipers. After this, a week-long training period for snipers began. With the help of his abilities, his father built a fortress, and the attack team was able to enhance their abilities with magic stones. As a result, Jessica learned to extend the ability some distance from her body, and Emma could use zonal treatment. Now it seemed to Michael that Emma's abilities were even better than Jessica's. Time flew by, and there was an hour left before the competition. Michael watched the arrivals through binoculars. Michael had seen something like this before, but now something seemed strange to him. They were building some kind of building, possibly to protect the gate core. But there was very little time left before the competition, and it was unlikely that they would be able to finish this building on time. Michael turned his attention downwards. The Knights of the Eames dimension announced that they had seen the list of their opponents, and that most of them were rank 9. According to the goddess Emis, there is mercy and salvation for everyone, and they can grant it to them. But they granted mercy through the tearing out of tongues and hard labor. Michael was impressed by their speech and not the least bit scared. He was sure that they would regret their arrogance. The commander of the Knights gave the order to attack. Henry ordered to open fire. Knights with shields had to push forward. The captain was confident that their shields would withstand the attacks, since the ranged weapons would quickly wear out, and they would be able to hold out. But they had more than enough weapons. After all, so far they have only used a fifth of their reserves. Michael told them to keep up the good work, and he, Lancelot, and Jessica will begin to advance slowly. The Knights quickly noticed that they were heading towards the gate's core, but were confident that it would not break so easily. For now, they could only hold out here and wait for the second detachment to join them. At this time, Bedivere launched a fireball, which flew right on target. They've sorted out the main lineup. Now only the goddess remains. To Michael's surprise, they built the fence quite quickly. Michael directed hellfire at her. But the statue was not damaged at all. She still even shone. In that case, Michael decided to keep this statue in subspace. The elder near the statue was sure that the people of Earth should worship the goddess Emis. The knights urged him to hide now. To the side, Michael noticed a warehouse of building materials, and he asked Pax to save him in subspace, too. The opponents turned around in surprise, noticing that the warehouse was gone. Michael offered Ethan to fly the helicopter after a short break. All that was needed was to get Michael to the highest altitude. Then they began to attack them from above with spears. But with the help of Jessica's protective field, they were able to fight back. One still managed to break through the defense. But Lancelot stopped him in time. It was strange, because the spears seemed to be the most ordinary, and Jessica's level of ability could stop even Michael's enhanced bullets. Lancelot once heard that there were dimensions where there was a skill that gave items an effect similar to a buff, and the knights continued their attack. Lancelot assumed that it was a blessing technology, and the building materials were selected to withstand their attacks. And when one of the copies fell into Jessica's hands, she already knew what to do with it. After the number of copies was reduced, Ethan announced that they would begin to take off, and they were able to destroy the statue with the help of God's staff. Michael's team emerged victorious and were awarded a prize, and Ethan, Jessica, Emma, and Adam were assigned the 8th rank. Michael was granted the right to conduct business in the Tertius region. A portal opened up in front of them that may have been related to these business rights. But when trying to enter the portal, the system announced that Michael was not registered. The system offered in this case to sell his rights to run the business to the Chamber of Commerce, and as payment, he would be given 10,000 magic stones. It was a pretty sneaky scheme. Michael wasn't even given a choice, and he may still have to sell the rights to the business. Michael didn't want to give up so easily. He even intended to throw away this paper, just so that the chamber would not receive any benefit from it. To his father's concerns, he replied that it was just a useless portal. Emma decided, since everything was over, to go finish treating the wounded. Michael apologized for calling them all out right after the battle, but Adam didn't see a problem with that. Michael opened a portal for them, and Jessica decided to go and throw the spears. Ethan was planning to drive for a bit, and Michael's father decided to go and rest. Until I saw building materials nearby, Michael said that now all of this is available to them in infinite quantities. The guy wanted to know the results of the competition in other regions, but the limit is 12 hours, so he will have to wait until night to find out the result. The system reported that a total of 761 matches had been played worldwide, with 113 wins and 648 losses, causing the Chamber of Commerce to downgrade the Earth's potential growth rating. The situation throughout the world was unfavorable, but in Korea it was better. All that was needed was to concentrate the troops in Incheon and reorganize. Fortunately, it was not far from here. One of the soldiers interrupted the meeting. The division from Incheon recorded a radiogram. It was an emergency report. The report said that their enemies were the lizard men from the dimension of Sabros. They were a systematically trained military force. They were able to fight both on the ground and in the air, which is why an artillery brigade and an air defense company were destroyed. The soldiers tracked their direction of travel and found out that they were heading to Seoul, so they decided to pass on the information as soon as possible. Ethan didn't understand why they needed to go to Seoul, because even if their goal was Michael, how could they know where he was? And there will be no reward for his capture. At that moment, Lancelot thought that the city that lost the competition and Seoul were quite close to each other. The system notified that the title of the winning regional representative would be displayed above the head. Jessica thought that they were probably talking about Michael, but there was no sign above his head. If Michael had not been a representative, the competition itself would have been meaningless. The question was why she couldn't be seen. According to information from the Chamber of Commerce, anyone who has rank 7 will be allowed to pass through the portals that are installed in this time zone. But since most have only recently reached rank 8, they may be trapped in space. In addition, winners who win business rights can create portals in a region by killing a representative of that region. Now they will have to deal with the 7th rank. It was like a territorial grab in a way. And maybe it was for the best that Michael didn't have a sign over his head. Lancelot seemed to have guessed something and climbed out the window. It turns out that the sign was not above Michael's head. but above the entire area. They didn't notice her because she was quite high up. And, most likely, it was thanks to this tablet that the lizardmen planned their attack. But still, something was wrong here. After all, the lizards began to regroup before the end of the competition. And after that, a new rule was introduced, as if the lizards knew about it in advance. Lancelot confirmed that this was most likely the case. Their tactic was to prepare for the next battle first, rather than attacking Soul's representative from the start. Jessica suggested going into subspace, but that option wasn't very reliable, because they could try to take others out as hostages, or split their forces and take over other areas. It was necessary to use subspace as a defense, and not just hide there. The most advantageous would be to shoot directly from there. Michael came up with a trap plan. If the lizards want him, they might try to lure them to a place where they have more of an advantage. This was a good idea, but it was important to do everything as quickly as possible. Ethan was confident that he could reduce the travel time as much as possible. He just needed to know where exactly. That was the problem, because they didn't think about the location. We needed a place where we could inflict a lot of damage and minimize damage from them, where they could avoid attracting attention. The Kion Bridge turned out to be such a place, since it has limited space for movement, and the surrounding area is a park without residential buildings. Plus, Bedivere would be able to watch them, since there were no tall buildings around. With the help of building materials, Father Michael's skills, and Pax's capabilities, everything will be much easier to arrange. Fortunately, the spears were preserved along with the warehouse of building materials. They would have been good to use for barricades, but Michael remembered that Bedivere had to be able to throw spears. At first they decided to build a frame and place the shooters there, and also build barricades around the building to block access from the ground. It was necessary to block one of the directions for the lizardmen, who are fast both on the ground and in the air. The work time was about 4 hours. They managed it thanks to Adam and Pax. However, they missed two things. The first is that reptiles were excellent swimmers, and the river under the bridge turned out to be the best place for an unnoticed approach to Bedivere. The second was that the bushes grew thicker than they could have expected. The lizards were surprised that the Ime's dimension lost to these guys. They assumed that they would be keeping their heads down for a while, so they would have a chance to rip something off. One of his subordinates called his attention to inform him that General Yatu was ready. Bedivere and Jessica were on the roof of the building and did not expect a stealthy attack from the air. They notified Michael about this, although he had already seen everything himself. The lizards were intent on avenging Sabros and Emes. Snipers opened fire on them. In addition, building materials from Emesa were used against them. The lizards considered it an insult to see them throwing around materials from their brother dimension. Brachus gave the command to Yatu to attack. He turned out to be quite huge and confident that no one could defeat him. At the moment of the attack, the stick pierced his nose. But that wasn't enough to kill him. Michael realized that they had lost a little control of the situation and began to worry. Lancelot and Yatu were both rank 7, but the lizard attacked without much skill. The most dangerous one for them was on the opposite side. Lancelot reported that it would likely be a difficult battle, but their attacks were effective against Yatu. If the lizard reached the building, the battle would be lost. Therefore, Michael had to continue to maintain constant attacks. And Lancelot will take on Rachis. Their forces were equal, so he repelled Lancelot's first attack without any problems. Brachus's comrades were worried about their general, but he was confident that he could handle it himself. After all, the knight seemed worthy of attention to him. He appreciated his courage to break into enemy territory alone and his skillful strike. It had been a long time since he had met a worthy opponent. He wondered what the name of the knight in front of him was. Brachus thought his name was pretty cool when he told him. He knew that Lancelot's goal was to catch him, and he only communicated with him because he was a warrior. Brachus believed that since ancient times, the warrior's instinct was to fight a strong enemy, and he offered Lancelot a fight to the death. The knight had no intention of refusing, but he was confused by the fact that his opponent was riding a lizard. Brachus didn't think it was unfair. Lancelot tried to tease him by pointing out that the beast was a possible attempt to compensate for his lack of skills. And it worked. At the same time, the snipers tried to fight off the onslaught of other lizards because they wanted to get into the building, and one of them has almost reached its target, wounding one of the soldiers. The wounded man had to be taken out, and the entrance blocked, as the number of lizards was increasing. But still, a spear that suddenly flew from above pierced one of the lizards, preventing him from getting into the building. And then Jessica finished him off. She ordered that they keep shooting while she took care of those trying to get in, dealing powerful blows with his ability, and then fighting back with bullets. Emma helped heal the wounds of the wounded. The lizards became more and more numerous, and Bedivere wasn't sure he could handle them alone. Michael continued to hit Yatu with building materials. The monster thought that the guy was trying to weaken him with consecutive attacks that would not allow him to rest. Only all this was sent automatically. And the lizard thought that these were more and more attacks. Michael felt relieved, realizing that he was just stupid. For now, Michael could distract him. But the question was what to do next. It would be too dangerous to just wait for Lancelot. And Michael wanted to help him, but he didn't know how. And then he noticed a holy spear in the lizard's hands. Racchus didn't like the fact that Lancelot kept avoiding his attacks. The knight wanted to respond to the lizard's provocation, but he was not so wrong. He noticed his opponent's unusual weapon, which turned out to be formidable. The knight asked if this weapon was made in the Eames dimension. The lizard replied that this spear was made in the Sabros dimension, but the Eames dimension improved it. Lancelot had a question. He decided to make another provocation and asked if it was true that this weapon was a way to hide the lizard's lack of skills. But he didn't fall for the same provocation twice. Racchus has already practically defeated Lancelot, but at the last moment, the spear froze and could not be moved. And then it flew out of the general's hands and returned to the portal. Michael saved it under the Eames building materials category and was surprised that it actually worked. And he thanked him, saying that he would use it wisely. They froze in place in surprise. The lizard considered this an insult to the sacred duel of warriors. He accused Lancelot of indecent behavior. However, if Michael took the spear, then he had a reason for it, and the knight told him to watch his words. The lizard found it funny that Lancelot's master was, in his opinion, a vile creature who did not know what honor was. He told him not to worry, as he would probably die anyway, by sword or hand or arrow. Lancelot had no intention of leaving him alive. The lizard was surprised by the knight's bravery, although he had just been on the verge of death. In any case, the fight continued. While the carnage was going on behind him, Michael was figuring out the system. The spear he took away had some pretty cool abilities. Yatu was surprised that Michael stopped attacking him. I thought Michael was just scared of his power. He was sure that dying by his hand was an honorable death, and he could be proud of it. But after that, 2 of Racchus' spears pierced his hand. While he was trying to understand what was happening, several more spears had already flown towards him and killed him. Thanks to his death, Michael received another power-up stone. After Jessica had sorted everything out, there was nothing else for her to do downstairs. But hearing the sounds of the wyvern from above, she turned around. And I remembered Bedivere. When she returned, Bedivere said she was late, and there is no one left. Lancelot delivered powerful blows to Racchus, which Jessica had taught him, although sometimes he managed to dodge. But the knight struck with his feet no worse than with his hands. Lancelot dealt him the final blow, and he flew away some distance. He asked if Racchus had anything else to say, but he could only say that it was a great duel. And then the knight killed him. The soldiers breathed a sigh of relief when the carnage was over. But a radio message came from the Joint Chiefs of Staff. This battle was difficult, but as long as the gates are open, the lizards will be able to enter here again. Now it's their time to attack them. Michael was thinking about unlocking the ability to deliver up to 8 items at a time. He still didn't know what to do with the amplifying stone with the fluidizing property. And now it's time for Camelot to produce new amplifying stones. Ethan reported that they had already arrived. Now they needed to find out the location of the Lizardmen's Gate, the number of troops, and the line of defense. So they are here to attack and get information. Michael was greeted with all the honors due to a colonel, but Michael felt awkward about it every time. The man introduced himself as Liam, a lieutenant colonel in the 17th Division's operations headquarters. and he had heard a lot about Michael's accomplishments. He said Henry would not be able to come because he had to urgently leave for the Joint Chiefs of Staff. Michael was aware and said that the bugs had attacked the Joint Committee. Liam suggested they talk inside. They knew where the gate was, but they didn't know the location of the gate's core. They sent snipers there to monitor the core's location. However, they lost it, and mud-like substances began to emerge from the gate. Liam decided to show Michael pictures of what it looked like. A strange mud filled the area around the gate. It didn't cause any physical harm, but it was difficult to move around, and the lizards could use it as cover. To Michael, it looked a bit like a swamp, and he didn't see a problem with it since he had friends for whom it wouldn't be a problem. But Lancelot, whom Michael had hoped for, said it would still be difficult. Moving around won't be a problem since the knights move around in ghost form, but the swamp is a large open area where they'll be easy to spot. Michael didn't think about it, but there was still a way, since Lancelot knew one guy who works quickly and quietly. They used the Power Stone to summon another one of the knights. It was Mordred. Unlike other knights, he did not often appear on the battlefield. He was able to become one of the knights by operating deep in enemy territory and using his skills in stealth, assassination, and theft. He became a great killer thanks to his outstanding skills and intelligence. But his greatest talent was secrecy. He could instantly become invisible to any creature. Although he did not actually disappear, he simply hid. He used this to become an assassin and was strong enough to survive. With the fluidized amplification stone, they learned that it allowed them to avoid physical impact, but only for a time. And now, thanks to the enhancement, it has become even better. Michael has already come up with an idea for how Mordred could be used. He explained the whole plan to him, and he understood it without any problem. Lancelot reminded him that if he died, all operations and plans would lose their meaning. He said that he had already learned from his own experience that these guys were not simple. Therefore, even if Mordred failed to obtain information, he must return to them alive. Mordred took note of this. Liam wasn't sure it was a good idea to send such a knight out alone, but Michael said he just needed to trust. The plan could only be worked out after Mordred returned, so now everyone needed to rest. Lancelot said that there was no need to worry about him, since he was not human and did not feel tired the way humans did. Michael noticed that there were many more scratches on his armor than before. However, as it turned out, if the knight's armor or weapons wore out, everything was restored in Camelot. Michael was surprised by this feature. As long as the item is not destroyed, they will be able to recover indefinitely. Lancelot also mentioned that a new power-up stone was now created in Camelot, the option of which was wound regeneration. Now it was necessary to think about where it could be used. But Lancelot sensed something and prepared to defend himself. It seemed to him that someone was hiding and eavesdropping on them. Michael felt uneasy about the possibility of spies being here. Lancelot didn't know the exact location or who this person was. He could only sense someone's presence. He suggested going to subspace. Turning around, he noticed someone spying on them and asked Michael to wait here. Lancelot's sword was already pointed at the boy watching them, and depending on how he answers the knight's questions, he will think about whether to leave him alive. The first thing he wanted to know was why he was hiding and eavesdropping. Afterwards, Michael heard a scream, and running up, he noticed how the knight was strangling the boy. Lancelot was still trying to find out from the one who sent him. Then the guy said Michael's name, and Michael remembered who it was. Michael didn't know what happened here, but he tried to calm Lancelot down, and he said that the man he was strangling now was his friend Isaac. Lancelot was genuinely surprised by this. Meanwhile, Mordred has discovered that the lizard men are likely to smell blood frequently and have become desensitized to it, so he may have to coat himself in plasma to make him harder to track. And after the smell is eliminated, it can begin to act. The passage to their lair was large, and it was not very effective. But since the lizard men were of different sizes, it was likely that the passage was made as wide as possible, indicating that there were giants among them. One of the monsters passed by him, almost hitting him. 1 more centimeter, and he could have been caught. But a monster passing by collided with him, and thanks to the fluidization, it was not discovered on the spot. He couldn't afford to fail his first mission now. It didn't take him long to find the gate's core. In the chair sat an old man who, apparently, was prevented from practicing magic by the core. Some menacing voice reminded the old man of their agreement. However, the old man promised only to protect the core of the gate, but not to entertain it. Instead of wasting time on nonsense, the magician suggested that he think about his dead subordinates. The voice reminded him that Ben had once been an arcane mage, but was now in exile, and he threatened him that he would arrange for a painful death if he did not know his place. The magician admitted that he had gone a little too far. Now Mordred knew about the representative of the humanoid race and a certain arcane magician Ben. However, it was still unclear what Ben had to do with the lizard men, and why he was guarding their core. And the strange creature that spoke to him was most likely the leader of the lizard men. He hadn't seen its full form, so the monster was definitely large, and the passage had most likely been dug for it. The chameleon, who had been nearby all this time, could not understand that he was leaning against his leg. He stuck out his tongue and sucked on Mordred, throwing him straight into the wall. His secrecy began to wear off. The magician was already prepared to neutralize the infiltrating spy, and he launched a magic projectile at him. Michael met Isaac at school, who was not shy about making jokes about his appearance. And in high school, they fought a lot. Isaac often tried to attract attention to himself with things and stories. However, he was unable to do so, and he was embarrassed to communicate with his classmates. One time, the older guys tried to take the game away from him, and they beat him when he didn't want to give it up. But Michael stood up for him. He did this in order to show Isaac, who made fun of him in front of everyone, that he was not a weakling. He later regretted it. That was the first and last time he saw his sister so cool, and she said she would make arrangements with the coach so that Michael could join the morning training. Jessica's friends were touched by her little brother. After meeting them, he apologized for the fact that they had to have his older sister as a friend. Turning around, he asked Isaac what he was going to do next. And after this incident, they became friends quite quickly. They started playing together more often, even though they continued to quarrel. And even after they transferred to different high schools, they continued to communicate. And then they met at the same university. Suddenly, he told Michael that he wanted to go to a kendo dojo sports school, because he was still impressed by Michael's exercises with his sister, which looked cool to him. Michael didn't think it was a good idea since Isaac had recently suffered a head injury, but he decided to try it anyway. Thanks to Isaac's dedication to training, his swordsmanship has now awakened within him. Despite Michael's surprised reaction, Isaac was equally shocked that Michael was a representative of Soul. He hid because he was afraid of the skeleton knight and waited for him to leave, but was eventually caught. What Lancelot was doing now was a little unnerving, but Michael did not order him to do this, and the knight did so because he could not forgive himself for his behavior. He was worried that he had failed to protect and tried to kill his lord's friend. Now he felt that he was not fit to be a knight. Michael asked if Isaac's mother was okay and invited her to stay with him in subspace. But the guy's reaction was ambiguous. In one of the houses, Isaac's mother heard a noise. Behind her, in the window, was Lancelot. He introduced himself as a commander of knights who faithfully serves his lord Michael, and he came to take her to her son in a safe place. It all started when Isaac was separated from his mother by a transparent barrier during a betting competition. So he agreed to take part in order to see his mother again. But he lost. After that, the transparent barrier disappeared, but the terraforming continued, so he couldn't see her. It was a transfer of the environment from one state to another. It wasn't dangerous in itself, but Isaac's mother would have been difficult to get to. So Lancelot went to look for her, to prove himself as a knight. He had no intention of repeating his past mistakes. He turned around at the noise, and he noticed Mordred running. He said that they needed to hurry, and he shouted to Lancelot to turn around. Lizards were chasing them from behind. At that moment, Lancelot was very angry with Mordred. Lancelot asked how many of the attackers were rank 7, but Mordred didn't know. Among the lizards, there were some he had not met before, so it was only a matter of time before they caught up with them. Lancelot told Mordred that he must return and tell Michael everything he needed to know, as well as fulfill a personal mission from Lancelot. He had to deliver Isaac's mother safe and sound, and he was responsible for her with his head. Lancelot asked me to tell Michael that a strengthening stone would be suitable for Parsifal. After that, they went their separate ways. Lancelot had nothing to fear, for he was a great knight of Camelot and would do anything in the name of his master. Mordred got to the right place without any problems. Isaac was very happy to know that his mother was now safe. But Michael sent Lancelot on this mission. Suddenly the system announced that the Knight of Camelot, Lancelot, had disappeared. Michael listened to Mordred's story about Lancelot sacrificing himself to protect Isaac's mother and important information. But he didn't die in the usual sense, because Michael could restore him with the help of the Power Stone. Michael wondered if he had been burdening Lancelot too much lately. Mordred remembered that the commander had asked him to convey something. He said that the strengthening stone would be suitable for Parsifal to use. He remembered that it was a stone with the ability to regenerate. The boy admired Lancelot's dedication, because even in such a dangerous situation, he thought about the strengthening stone. Now, Michael wanted to find out from Mordred everything he had seen and heard, so that Lancelot's sacrifice would not be in vain, and they could develop a plan. Lancelot's helmet was now in the hands of the magician. He wondered if there were any more sorcerers or liches here. The monster praised Ben for his excellent work, because despite the fact that he had lost the spy, they had managed to catch a knight with the 7th rank. And this would have greatly undermined the enemy army. The magician didn't need his words about a job well done. It was more important to thank him, because he wasn't the one who was supposed to catch the criminals. Ben decided to ask what the monster was going to do with the Power Stone now. He was originally going to give it to Rakus and Yatu, but now they were gone. The old man offered to give the stone to him, but the reptile needed something in return. The old man offered to make him the final scroll. Scrolls were items that allowed non-mages to use magic, but there was a decent price to be paid for their creation, and a mage could give one to a monster for 3 D-class enhancement stones. The monster wasn't sure, because the scrolls the mage created were created with the help of living creatures placed in them, and in his opinion, it would be much more efficient to trade equipment. Ben was not happy that the monster did not appreciate his masterpiece and called them savages. The monster suggested that if Ben thought of them as savages just because they didn't follow his path, then he thought of all the other arcane mages as savages too. Reptile planned to use the amplifying stone when he had to deal with the Eames boys. And for the scroll, the mage was supposed to use the prisoners they would provide. They turned around at the sudden sound. The knight Parsifal came to visit them. The old man assumed that he was a comrade of another knight and had come to avenge his death. Ben threw a magic scroll with a fire step at him, but this had no effect. The magician realized that his opponent was quite a tough nut to crack, and he wanted to try something else on him, but the scroll did not appear in his hand. To his surprise, the portal that opened took all the remaining scrolls. Michael did his part and told Parsifalius to take care of the rest. The knight turned to Mordred. Ben didn't understand who he was talking to and decided that it was the one who stole his scrolls. But the knight behind him threw off his disguise and cut off his head. Earlier, Mordred told everyone about the old mage he saw who was banished from Arcane. Michael remembered that the then head of the Camelot castle mistook him for a magician and also said something about Arcane. Bedivere knew that this was a dimension of powerful mages, of which there were 3 ranks, but even the lowest rank was the 6th, and they were incredibly strong. Mordred also heard that Ben was now unable to use his magic, and Jessica assumed that then he was not dangerous. Since the existing hierarchy lost its power after Ben was banished, there was no reason why they wouldn't need to kill him, but the magician could use the scrolls. The knight explained that the scroll was a piece of paper that could contain relatively simple magic, but it was still a very valuable item. The mage could make these scrolls, of which he had plenty, and use them when necessary. Now it remained to find out whether the lizard men had these scrolls and what kind of magic they contained. Mordred was unable to find out that much, but he thought about it during the chase. Thanks to his fluidization ability, he was able to become invisible to others again, and he wondered why the magician was using the scroll. The chameleon told the guard that he saw an uninvited guest here. The reptiles planned to seal the entrance, but Mordred cut off the head of one of them, and then to the chameleon. The old man was angry that the stupid lizards could not stop just one intruder, and now he will have to spend his precious scrolls. What was surprising to the knight was that Ben came out of the cave and rushed in pursuit, along with everyone else. Apparently, Ben and the lizard men had risked everything on this chase, which resulted in the death of Captain Lancelot. But Michael didn't want Mordred to blame himself, since he had managed to obtain valuable information. Michael understood that the knight was also risking his life, so no one was going to blame him. After all, in fact, Michael was partly to blame for this. Now the focus was on figuring out how to close their portal. Bedivere suggested that since the scrolls were difficult to make, it was unlikely that the mage would share them with other lizard men. Liam's guess was that if Costas, the potential leader, and Ben, the mage who was supposed to protect the gate's core, were in the same cave, then their job was to guard the core. But despite the importance of his task, the magician left the cave and rushed in pursuit. So he had two assumptions. The first assumption was that the enemy's forces were insufficient, so the mage had no choice but to leave. The second was that the mission to protect had to mobilize maximum forces. Michael suggested that if they just caught the mage, everything else would be much easier to deal with. The only question was how to neutralize him. But after thinking about it, Michael had an idea. After Michael reached the third level of subspace, he received a new ability, a category. But unfortunately, he could not create new or change old categories. He was only able to keep Rakis's spear because the weapon belonged to the Eames building materials category. And thanks to the fact that he recently killed the traitorous commander, he reached the fourth level, which allowed him to create new categories. Another problem was that packs only allowed the use of the scrolls themselves, not the magic. According to their plan, Jessica and Parsifal will go into the cave as an assault group. Jessica decided to ask him if he was really an active hike leader. She hoped they could cope. As a result, she didn't even have a chance to prove herself. She retreated into subspace to get out of the way. But she was burning with desire to rush into battle. The lizards wanted to warn Ben about the attack, but Mordred, who led this group, quickly dealt with them. At this time, Mordred was being watched by the leader, now knowing who had killed Ben, and was surprised that someone could secretly decide to infiltrate using invisibility. Parsifal was already quite close to the core, but he couldn't because of the monster's blow. Mordred, in turn, also tried to harm the core, but the monster pushed him back with its tail. It was determined not to let them touch it. The monster had heard of their strength during the Soul Offensive, but knew nothing about these two. He already regretted working with the magician. Then he took the core into his mouth, and he went through the wall. The monster had already managed to find out that at least the enemy representative did not have the 7th rank, and was outside the cave to observe and assess the situation. And now that the main forces are concentrated in the cave, we need to deal with it. Having emerged from the cave, he opened his mouth to seize the helicopter. Michael called in a shipment of goods that pierced the monster's neck, and they were able to dodge it. He recognized them as the building materials of the Eames boys, and had already heard that they had carried out strange attacks. Now Michael ordered Ethan to keep his distance. The next batch of building materials was already rushing towards him from above. But thanks to his plasticity, he was able to avoid the blows. This made Michael feel uneasy. In one swift movement, the snake climbed up one of the tall buildings to reach the helicopter's level, and released purple poison, which corroded the helicopter windows. Michael called the helicopter back into subspace, and after a few minutes they returned back. And the snake was surprised that after leaving the portal, the transport was completely restored from his poisonous attack. Michael didn't care if the helicopter was broken, as they could use a new one. The problem now was that the beam attack didn't work on the kite. He decided to try something different on it, and he aimed the spear of Rakis at the serpent, and then the second. The monster was confused. At this time, an ice spear flew out of the portal, which was created with the help of a scroll from Ben. But this was not enough to defeat the snake. Michael took advantage of the return again. The knights also returned to the portal. The snake tried to understand what kind of power Michael had if he could go to another space, and the sign, representative of soul, hung over the place where he was. He didn't have much time to think, because at that very moment, a portal opened, from which Michael appeared with his family and friends, with scrolls in their hands. And they launched a powerful attack with ice spears at the monster, piercing it from all sides. Now, thanks to the temporary freezing of the snake, Michael summoned the Black Hawk. And while it was difficult for the snake to move, it was necessary to act. Michael ordered them to lay out everything they had, and all the spears, missiles, and fireballs fell upon the serpent. Now he had no chance to stay alive. The only thing Michael wanted to find out from the snake was why they were so worried about the invasion. Michael was not satisfied with his answers, because he spoke ambiguously. All the monster managed to say before dying was that the Earth dimension was very close, and when the time comes, they will hunt for other dimensions. After all, that was the whole point of the system. Now, after his death, the number of magic stones in Michael's account has increased to 17,668. Michael still didn't understand what the snake meant. Mordred reminded him that even though the main enemy was dead, the core of the gate was still intact. He remembered seeing the monster swallow the gate core for protection. It turns out that the core was now inside the monster's corpse. However, Mordred told Michael not to worry about it. After all, their home space was famous for the fact that they cut up just such corpses. Mordred entered first, and the rest of the knights followed him. Now, thanks to the murder, the cores of the magic stones became 51,306, and the terraforming began to disappear. Mordred looked out and said that they had found something. These were the 3 strengthening stones, thanks to which they were able to bring Lancelot back. With the core destroyed, the Sabros dimension lost its business rights, and the Incheon area was returned to Earth. Michael knew it was late, but he decided to thank Lancelot for his help. Lancelot felt sorry for what had happened, but Michael understood that it was quite difficult to fulfill his duty. It doesn't matter whether it's done well or not. In any case, Michael could have limited himself to a simple, "Thank you," and in return, he will say, "Please." Lancelot initially wanted to apologize again, but in the end, he simply said, "Thank you." In Korea, this was the only area that lost the competition. And now that Incheon has been reclaimed, all the monsters have been destroyed. However, this was not a guarantee of complete safety, because there were still primitive monsters, and it would take some more time to get rid of them and rebuild the country. After the battle, Chief of Staff Liam flew to him. He asked how they managed to defeat such a huge monster. After what happened, everyone sat down at the table, and Michael was incredibly happy to see Chinese cuisine on the table. While they were gone, Emma treated Isaac's mother. But the woman did not know how to repay such kindness. And when she found out that they had an unlimited amount of ingredients, she remembered that she had a friend who was a chef. And thanks to the ingredients provided, the chef and part-time owner of the famous Chinese restaurant turned them into the most wonderful dishes. He was glad that he had the opportunity to cook even with the current situation in the world. Although Michael was still surprised that one chef could prepare so many dishes, but as it turned out, the chef only prepared 1 portion of each. Pax did the rest. Jessica kept asking Michael for more. Chloe and Linda were trying to figure out how they could make food that delicious. And thanks to their victory, they were able to enjoy a festive feast. Suddenly, Jim's wife felt a little unwell. Emma thought that there was something wrong with the jam, but she hadn't eaten much. And she asked if she had been feeling sick in the mornings lately, if she had felt dizzy or had a dry mouth. She confirmed that this was true, but she thought that everyone felt something similar lately. Emma said that these could very well be early symptoms of pregnancy. And immediately after the meal, Michael's older brother made the announcement that they had taken a test, and the pregnancy had been confirmed. Ethan was happy for Michael. Now everyone started discussing the list of necessary things, and Jessica was even thinking about training for the child. But during the conversation, Liam approached Michael, saying that a message had arrived from the chief of the operational headquarters, which was worth paying attention to. Henry reported that it appears terraforming is ongoing. In China and Japan, it continued to take place on a large scale, and its effects slowly reached them. So far, the main problem has been the toxic gases from the Beijing Gate and the poisonous water from the Fukuoka Gate. Michael asked what could cause more serious damage. So far, neither of these had been a significant problem. But the toxic gases from the Beijing Gate were worth paying attention to. And beetles. The gases haven't spread yet, but some insects have already started to approach. So it's only a matter of time before the gas appears. It was necessary to close the gates in Beijing. They planned to send their troops, but they could not solve this problem on their own. Henry felt awkward asking for help, but Michael was willing to take part, because if they didn't act, all of Korea would turn into hell. Michael wondered if it would be a problem if they went straight to China without an invitation, but they agreed that Michael would go there that evening. After all, he can't allow his future nephew to live in a world full of giant insects and polluted air. Michael improved subspace, and now with it, he was able to set up portals in different places. But there were some conditions, including that the installed portal would be fixed in the place where it was located and could not be moved. The portal does not have physical power, so it cannot be used as a wall to avoid attacks. However, despite this, those who are allowed to pass will be able to enter the subspace through this portal and avoid enemy attacks. Now Michael would be happy with even these abilities. Isaac asked if they were going to China right now, to which Michael replied that they needed to hurry. And after the gates closed in China, they would need to go to Japan. Isaac was glad that his friend had such an ability and told him that he could count on his help at any time, because he had not yet had time to prove himself as a swordsman. They wished each other a good journey and parted ways. One of the soldiers at the airport called a certain James to tell him about a call from the Joint Chiefs of Staff, and that the people who were supposed to arrive in China were already here. The man was not ready to meet them so early, because he had not yet completely finished his work. The soldier thanked Michael for arriving so quickly, and introduced himself as Captain Oliver of the 3rd Guards Brigade. He wanted to demonstrate to them the means of flight in order to fly to China. It was a plane that could get to Beijing twice as fast as the Black Hawk. Ethan was delighted to see the plane, because he had only seen it before in spy films. However, they had to wait some more time to complete the modifications before taking off. It was necessary to slightly rebuild the aircraft to have minimal defensive capabilities for the fight. Now Michael understood, because earlier he wondered what kind of light was under the plane, and it turned out that it was engineers. But Oliver clarified that there was only one engineer working there. Michael was surprised that only one person was working on such a huge vehicle, and he just finished. James informed them that after the upgrade, there would be no noticeable difference on the outside, as he was working on the lower part. In his opinion, flying monsters would hardly fly sideways at the speed of a transport and attack. Thanks to the magic stone in James's hand, he automatically translated the speech, and they learned that James had previously worked as an aeronautical engineer who was sent to the airline. But due to the events that had happened, he was locked up here. At first, Michael assumed that his ability would only be associated with a slight improvement in skills and ease of use. But now I am convinced that his abilities are quite extraordinary. Before leaving, they decided to distribute all food and other goods to the locals. Michael wanted to share some of the supplies with James, and after that he realized that James was an extraordinary person. Because the world is such now that you have to hide from monsters and endure hunger, thirst, and fear. Therefore, offering people water and objects always makes them happier. But not James. When Michael suggested trying Chinese food, he replied that he was not hungry. He didn't like almost anything and had no interest. He asked Pax to take the food back, and the only thing that interested him was mechanisms. Michael thought he was a bit of a pervert. After all, if he is an ordinary person like all of them, then he must surely have a dream. Even though Michael didn't fully understand his abilities, he already really wanted to recruit this man. The guy invited James to go with him. After all, in addition to food and other items, he had many cars at his disposal, as well as a motorcycle, which he allowed him to use as he wanted. And, as a bonus, protection from monsters. But the man again said he didn't want to. He was sure that he could not trust Michael so easily. Knowing that this was true, Michael had little to convince him. Michael said he suggested it because he thought their abilities might work together. In any case, Michael decided to say goodbye to him and thanked him for the repair. But James was interested in the fact that Michael wanted to use his abilities. He had one condition, which was that if Michael went to America, he had to take James with him. Then he will accompany them all the way. Michael decided to check if James would really share his abilities if he took him to the States. Although it was not close to the USA, it was at least some kind of agreement. Michael asked him why he wanted to go to America. The man wanted to go back to a certain place. He didn't really want to go and risk his life, but Michael seemed pretty strong to him. Michael said it was possible, but warned that it would be difficult because the gates in China would have to be closed first and then go to Japan. But if it didn't take too long, that was fine with James. Michael came up with something to seal their deal. He provided him with a lot of military equipment and motorcycles, and he said that he could dispose of them as he wished. Michael called it something of a gift, and then he left James to deal with the technology. Michael realized that his gift looked quite impressive. James was surprised that the guy was just going to leave so much equipment behind, and he couldn't understand what kind of ability he had. He already had time to regret a little that he had not gone with Michael right away. By the time Michael got to the right place, the bugs had already filled a large area. He felt a little disgusted by the whole sight, but Ethan announced that he was about to land. And, having landed, the plane immediately went into subspace, after which Lancelot came out of it. He informed Michael that he could come out. The guy specially put on protection from poisonous gas. They noticed some people ahead. They were met by a man named Asher, who was waiting for them. Having reached the right building, he was glad that the beetles did not pursue them. Asher apologized for the fact that the room they were currently in was not the best. But, looking at the situation, it wasn't that important. Looking at the people around him, Michael was shocked by their condition. Asher explained that they use internal energy to cleanse the air of poison, so the mask was not necessary here. This ability was passed on to those who awakened from Murim. There were many different schools of martial arts in China that maintained long-standing traditions. And when monsters appeared in the world, so did those who awakened the power within themselves. Among the members of these schools, their strength was different from ordinary people, as often ordinary people awakened their own abilities. But all the awakened ones associated with martial arts schools received an ability related to an unknown internal energy. The peculiarity was that they could use this energy at their own will with their own individuality. The Chinese government quickly recognized their abilities and gathered people to defeat the monsters. And the leader of these warriors was a man known as the Cloud Sword of the Scarlet River, Asher. However, Asher's group was only one of all the awakened ones, and all the others are not always like them. The problem for them was the competition, because only 2 were held in Beijing, and the winner was the Beelzebub region. Michael was not surprised that 2 competitions were held here, since Beijing has twice the population of Seoul. They lost because they lacked information about their opponents, since all they knew was that they were emitting toxic gas. Ordinary awakened people who did not know how to use internal energy died. And awakened people of the Murim world could make the gas non-toxic. But there was one but. The problem was the amount of energy spent on detoxification, which made it impossible to fight at the same time. Because of this, the gates opened and the number of insects began to increase steadily. So the longer they used detox, the worse they got, because they needed to breathe fresh air and build up energy. Michael asked if they felt better in the fresh air. Asher confirmed this, and Michael asked to step away for a moment. The subspace contained canned air from Mount Chirisan. Using the laboratory, he was able to extract the contents of the jars and create a layer of air. And after the air masses accumulated, they could be registered as a product. It was necessary to release the registered air masses for the Murim masters and set everything up so that they were automatically sent out at 1-second intervals. The flow of fresh air was so strong that even the windows couldn't withstand it, and it became much easier for the fighters. Asher was surprised that his people felt better so quickly, and I wondered what kind of power was connected to the portal. When Asher asked for help from Korea, he thought they would refuse. But then he was informed that Colonel Michael would be happy to help without hesitation. Even though he knew that Korea had been successful in the competitions, he was genuinely surprised that they would come to his aid. And now he realized how wrong he was. After all, Michael had incredible abilities. He bowed sharply to Michael, and he apologized for any inconvenience this caused Korea, thanking them for their help. Michael tried to assure him that there was no need for such gratitude, since they were helping because they also wanted to survive. Now, thanks to Michael's abilities, the warrior's internal energy began to accumulate. Asher suggested taking a short break and meet in the morning in 3 days. And since Asher suggested taking a break, Michael wanted to do it as well as possible. He fed all the people with the most delicious food, which even Asher himself approved of. Now it was necessary to discuss how to get rid of the bugs. The man said that the bugs were not that different from those they were used to seeing. However, they were several times larger and emitted toxic gas, especially moths and flies. Most of the insects were level 9 or 8, but there were also some that were level 7. But there were so many of them that it was difficult to understand all their nuances. If they see a large pile of insects, then they are most likely level 8. If they see fewer and it seems strong at first glance, then it is most likely level 7. While they were discussing the gate, Lancelot noticed something in the distance, and he told Michael about it. The knight could not describe exactly what it was because he saw this creature for the first time, but it was clear that it was most likely level 7. Michael wanted to know why this nasty creature was moving so fast, and guessed that it was level 6, not 7. Although Asher already knew that it was a rank 8 centipede, Michael was surprised because she looked stronger. But, according to Asher, it was inferior in strength to grasshoppers and hornets. Jessica offered her help in this matter, confident that she could cope with this creature herself, because she was already tired of sitting on her butt all day. Michael let her go, allowing her to show what they could do. To Asher's concern, he replied that his older sister was so strong that he sometimes thought that there were celestials among their ancestors. Only Michael forgot about the presence of toxic gases in insects. And now it seemed they had a problem. She struck her first blow. Asher explained that despite the fighter's abilities, they can inhale toxic gas during battle, which poisons the human body. And the centipede's shell is so hard that such blows are unlikely to harm it. He wanted to send his student to help Jessica. She was supposed to help with the treatment of internal injuries. But, hearing an incomprehensible sound, they looked out from the balcony. Jessica's blow was so powerful that defeating the centipede was no problem for her. They were shocked because it would have taken Asher a lot of effort to break the shell. After all, to their surprise, she had not studied internal energy before and used standard techniques. For a moment, the thought flashed through Asher's mind that she might possess the body of a heavenly warrior. However, the poisonous gas still affected Jessica, and Asher's student had to immediately begin treating her. Despite the centipede interrupting their discussion, they continued to make plans to break the bugs through the gate. And they figured out a few things. The first thing was that the polluted atmosphere made movement difficult. The second was that there were too many insects, and it was impossible to catch them one by one. Not to mention the strange creatures of the 7th level. The third was that they had only 3 days to close the gates. Therefore, in order to deal with it quickly, they had to avoid encounters with the insects and break through to Baiwangshan Mountain, where the core was located, as quickly as possible. It would be quite difficult to do this, because the closer they were to the gate, the more aggressive the insects would be. Fortunately, it wasn't that far to go. This was the best option at the moment, so I needed to quickly master some techniques. Asher wanted to teach Jessica the skills they possessed, but to test her abilities, he suggested a duel. He noticed that Jessica preferred to fight with her bare hands, and thought it would be useful for her to learn the essence of fist fighting from Agnes. Jessica was grateful that they thought so highly of her, but she wasn't sure if she had to go that far. However, Agnes said that they would have to use their powers to the maximum to close the gate, and in terms of strength, she is second only to Master Asher. The girl nevertheless agreed, but suggested that he address her informally and asked him not to be offended if he accidentally injured her, and she rushed into the attack. But Agnes took the blow with dignity. Since Michael had grown up 20 years being defeated by his sister, he didn't experience the same thrill of combat that Asher did. The man suggested that his sister focus on fencing, because that was exactly Asher's specialty, and he kindly offered Michael to learn fencing from him. Michael was not eager, but he asked if he could bring a friend who really loved swords, and Asher took over his training. Although they could not control internal energy like martial artists, they could adapt their techniques to themselves in order to diversify their arsenal of techniques. To Michael's surprise, Jessica learned so quickly. It was as if she had been born among the masters. Perhaps there was some invisible connection between her and the masters. At this time, the masters brought out their inner strength to the maximum using pure energy from the mountain. And Isaac mastered new techniques and became stronger and stronger. Michael also didn't want to just sit still and decided to use stones to create a weapon that could effectively fight insects. Also, as the subspace level increases to level 5, new upgrade items will be added. And Michael already had one idea in the form of using an electric insect trap. The problem was that it worked on small insects, but most of the bugs were larger than the trap, so it wasn't much use. He could make it big enough to catch larger creatures, but that had its own difficulties. Michael couldn't come up with a single good idea because he didn't even have any special knowledge. And everything else failed, just like the electric trap. He would have liked to just get into the helicopter, but that would have been too dangerous since they hadn't located the flying bugs. And the delivery radius was only 100 meters, so they would have to get pretty close. The best solution was to make pesticides. The daughter-in-law appeared from behind and said that she might be able to make them. Michael remembered that when he got to his family, Jim told him that they survived because his wife became an alchemist. He was so happy then that he completely forgot about it. She was glad that her abilities could help him, and casually she mentioned that she had already used the lab, but told him about it only now, since he was very busy. She asked what kind of pesticides he needed. To destroy such a creature, a super powerful insecticide was needed. 3 days later, they set out to destroy the monsters. Even with the short training period, Asher was confident that he was in better physical shape than ever. And all this thanks to Michael's help. One of the warriors said that there would be many beetles ahead, and Asher ordered everyone to prepare for battle. It was necessary to give it our all and destroy this swarm of insects. But when the poison spilled onto the beetles, they died instantly thanks to the liquid created by Michael. Emily had already managed to work with the hologram in the lab for some time before this, thanks to which she was able to create various useful things. Fortunately, pesticides were fairly easy to create. Michael was amazed by the lethal power of the drug, which, fortunately, was harmless to the human body and had no smell. It might not work on rank 7 bugs, but it worked very effectively on normal ones. Mount Baiwangshan, which they needed to get to, was now teeming with insects. Thanks to the pesticides, they were able to get through Beijing without any problems. But the journey from there was much more difficult. They have tried to destroy the gate core several times in the past, but nothing worked because of the whole armies of beetles that attacked them. It had been a while, so Asher wasn't sure he knew all the bugs that were there. The terrain could cause problems with flying enemies. Michael said that they didn't need to worry, because his knight was also a 7th rank knight, and Michael had a weapon to counter it. The guy underestimated his opponent a little. After all, the grasshoppers that lived there were incredibly huge. Perhaps if Michael had thought it through properly, he could have figured it out. It was surprising that such a large beetle could only have the 7th rank. The question was whether he had ever filled out the registration form in the other dimensional space. Michael remembered Lancelot's words about how using sacrifices to gain rank was a method used by low-intelligence creatures that they used reflexively. For a rational being, gaining rank through sacrifice was a shortcut. But speaking of primitive life forms from another dimension, they killed other creatures and consumed their magic stones. In other words, they were powerful beings who gained their rank by absorbing many lives. Michael tried to attack him with beams, but naturally, this had no effect. Lancelot suggested using Rachis' spear, but Jessica rushed into the attack before Michael could stop her. Lancelot turned around when he sensed something was wrong. The tree behind seemed to move, and only then did they realize that it was not a tree, but legs. Michael turned towards the sound, and a huge spider appeared before them. The knight suggested climbing onto the spider's body, since he wouldn't be able to reach them from behind, and it would be harder for other insects to attack. And it would be more profitable to climb up and regroup, making a new plan there. Michael approved of his plan and told everyone to climb onto the spider's back. The warriors reached the top by walking on air, Jessica by stepping on barriers, and Michael and Lancelot climbed up, grabbing onto the fur. Now the question was whether Michael should use Rakus's spear and focus on attacking, as it might work on a spider but would hardly work on a grasshopper. Jessica managed to tap on the creature's shell a little during this time and found that it was incredibly hard, so killing it could take forever. At that moment, the grasshopper bounced off the ground, what the rest were not prepared for, and he pounced on the spider. It was necessary to retreat immediately. While the warriors tried to understand what had happened, the grasshopper killed the spider by biting its head. Michael was surprised because he thought they would be allies, even though they were still just regular bugs. They could distinguish enemy from friend, but were not smart enough to fully recognize an ally. So they attacked first, thought later. Michael decided that this time they should try to climb on the grasshopper's back. They did it without any problems. It seemed to Michael that the grasshopper had time to realize that they had climbed onto his back. But judging by the fact that he stood motionless, it didn't look like he noticed. At least now they could breathe a little easier. For now, Michael said that they need to wait, because if they can destroy the gate core, then all the insects will disappear after that. And so far, they have had no need to fight the grasshopper. Michael's plan was that when the right moment arrived, they would jump off and aim for the core. The grasshopper suddenly jumped forward. They had to hold on to keep from falling, although it was quite difficult and a little painful. Michael was beginning to doubt that climbing on the grasshopper's back had been a good idea. Even the first time he got in the helicopter with Ethan, he didn't feel this bad. Suddenly, Michael heard a sound like a helicopter. It turned out to be a huge bee. Dealing with a bee would not be so easy, especially when she released her stinger and aimed it at Michael. He thought that it was the end for him, and Lancelot tried to save him. However, the bee did not manage to do what she wanted, because the grasshopper repelled her attack. This came as a surprise to Michael, as the grasshopper had apparently attacked because it felt threatened. The reason didn't matter. The main thing was that it was amazing. The grasshopper pierced the wasp's head with his paw. Michael wanted the insect to sting the bee on the neck while it was crawling on the ground, but his intelligence was too low to think of such a thing. This was a headache for Michael because with such physical characteristics, a grasshopper could easily chew other insects. Suddenly, Michael had an idea of how he could try to control the insect. He opened a portal to meet Ethan, and he asked if he could by any chance control beetles. It was a rather unexpected question. They attached a rope to the insect's horns, and they had to try to take control of it. Ethan was ready and told everyone to hold on tight. He was able to turn the grasshopper towards the bee, and then it easily bit off her head. The fighters were incredibly happy about this, but the joy did not last long as a huge moth appeared from above. But thanks to Ethan's skill, the grasshopper easily dealt with the moth, and then with the rest of the insects on their way. They used beams for the ants, but in the end, they had to kill the grasshopper too. Lancelot was sure that there weren't many 7th rank beings who could handle him, and Ethan helped them a lot in this. Upon returning, Bedivere reported that there were no more beetles in the area, although it was still necessary to continue to keep an eye out. Now all that remains is to try to close the gate. Asher thanked them for giving him the opportunity to avenge his comrades. Michael thought it was a small thing, but Asher wanted to repay the kindness. After all, in any case, he will never be able to honor the memory of the souls of tens of millions of people who died. And the only thing he could do for all of them was to end the gate with his most powerful technique. And, releasing his ability, Descending Trail, he killed the core, thus avenging the dead. Michael was amazed by Asher's amazing ability, but only one gate disappeared, and in the remaining open ones, something protected the core. And this something was a huge monster, like a fly.